I really do feel like this is Christmas morning. This is one of the biggest gifts that I have received all year, to see us together after a 2-year learning process. Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Vanessa Cooksey, and I have the great honor of being the president and CEO of the Regional Arts Commission. I am excited about today. I've got a few things to share, but I first have to start out with a few thank yous. First and foremost, thank you to Mont Levy, who, give a clap for him, who led our commission as chair through some really challenging times. We had our board staff retreat this past Saturday, and one of the themes was VUCA. Raise your hand if you're familiar or have heard of the term VUCA, V-U-C-A. Okay, well, I'll tell you about it right quick. I expected more hands. It is a term that stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. I won't tell you the whole story because when we have our town hall on October the 19th, I will tell the story. I hope you all will be there. It's virtual this go around. But that's the environment in which we are leading, and that's the environment in which Mont was the chair, and we sit here today because of his commitment to capacity building and learning for our sector, and making sure that we could not only start this program, but finish it. So very special thanks to Mont. Also want to thank Cheryl Walker, who I think is on the way, who is our current board chair, and her leadership is stellar. She allows me to be my very best in this role, so wanted to thank her. Also want to thank Michael Kaiser, for whom has been, yes, it is definitely worth clapping for Michael Kaiser, not only for his leadership in providing this opportunity for learning and growth and development, but for his willingness to be open to me in this leadership role. When I first joined, it'll be 2 years in 42 days, right? I've been in this role 2 years, I can't believe it. But Michael was one of the first people that I talked to, and he was very integral to the strategic plan in which we're implementing that I'm going to talk a little bit about next, but not just his candor, but his honesty and his forthrightness and willingness to provide good counsel and advice have been very important in laying a strong foundation for my leadership. And then last but not least, I want to thank Marie Gossman Thomas, who without her, this would not be possible. So you can really clap loud for Marie. Organizing people is hard work. You all know that because you do it all the time. And making sure that people have what they need for whatever the experience is really important. So thank you, Marie, for your leadership and your commitment to this process. I want to talk for a couple of minutes about why this is a super big win for RAC. We launched our strategic plan in March of 2020, and for many of you, that was one of the last big events that you attended with and for RAC. We spent 3 years preparing for this strategic plan to launch it for the world to shut down and send everybody home. And the 4 pillars of our strategic plan are so important. They're more important now than even when we launched the strategic plan. Capacity building for artists and arts organizations, arts education for our young people, DEI leadership through collaboration, and strengthening organizational infrastructure. And the fact that we sit here today not only is a real milestone in our strategic plan in which we're at the halfway point, but it ladders up to 3 of the 4 pillars very clearly. So when we talk about capacity building for arts organizations, this is that program for us, and what you have learned about board development and fundraising and just taking care of the business of the arts is absolutely critical as we look at the landscape under which we operate, right? We're in the process of doing our AEP6 data collection, so thank you for those that attended our event last month. There are 733 arts nonprofits in St. Louis City and St. Louis County. That's a lot. And as we grapple with the changing economic landscape, organizations that take the time to dig into building their capacity, strengthening their organizational infrastructure, are going to be the ones that are not only sustained in our community, but able to have the greatest impact. So I'm super excited about that. The other component of our strategic plan is the DEI leadership. When I look across this room and see the leaders, what I'm most excited about, what we have been able to create together, is what I'm calling intra-sector engagement. Where else can you find, other than through this experience, an opportunity for large performing arts organizations, small performing arts organizations, visual arts organizations coming together to learn? Right? We have to work together as a sector. We can't continue to operate in our silos and bubbles. And we've spent 2 years together learning, and some of the things we've learned have been relevant to one organization and not so much to the other. But I think the camaraderie and the relationships that we've built, the ability to be vulnerable and share what we're going through, strengthens us as a whole. Also, as it relates to DEI, I want to give a particular thanks to Michael Donovan, who leads the Missouri Arts Council. He provided RAC we went through a process. We didn't just give us money, we had to apply for it. A $20,000 grant that RAC then matched to do a $6,000 grant to our BIPOC-led organizations, right? So as we look at how capacity building will be a long-term integral part of RAC's work, for me, what's the point of learning something and then not having the resources to implement, right? So we wanted to make sure that for our BIPOC-led organizations, they could test out and experiment and apply what they've learned in a way that makes sense for their organization. So thank you to Michael Donovan. And also, thank you to NCCJ. Hopefully you all remember the DEI session that we had, and thank you to the DeVos Institute for allowing us to insert that into the curriculum, because it's important to RAC, right? It's one of our 3 pillars, and it's absolutely something where we walk the walk, and we're being noticed for it, right? And so I appreciate the opportunity and the flexibility to really live our values. And then last but not least, why this is important to us, it is a great demonstration of public-private partnership. We sit here in gratitude to the Centene Foundation, who wrote the biggest part of the check to make this happen for us. And so when we think about how we move our sector forward, public-private partnership is absolutely critical for us. And we will see more of that this Thursday. Now I'm getting into shameless plugs for a lot of things. We are making significant progress in our advocacy for ARPA funds for our sector. On Thursday at 1 o'clock, the Tourism Committee of the Board of Aldermen will meet for a reading of Bill number 66, which is for $10.6 million for RAC for our sector. So I am cautiously optimistic. We've been through a lot with our elected officials since we made our initial ask. For many of you in this room who have had a leadership role in pulling us together, over 111 organizations signed a letter. We sent that letter to every elected official in St. Louis City and St. Louis County in October of last year. We started talking about the letter in June of last year. So we have been on this journey. There's $12.6 million on the line. So I think it's worth it to stay engaged. But what I'm more proud of is how we've been able to come together for the greater good of this sector. Like, we are really saying we're an industry, we're an economic driver. We will not be ignored, we will not be denied. So thank you for staying the course. I am cautiously optimistic. This is step 2 of 4 in the legislative process for our securing of the funds. After it's read in committee, it will go back to the Board of Alder for an official vote, and at that time, it'll go to the mayor for signature. So there are X number of weeks between each step. We're about 12 weeks out if we stay on not if we stay on task, if our elected officials stay on task, because we are going to stay on task no matter what. But that brings me to the last point, which is super important, and you'll start to see more of this with RAC, is civic engagement. RAC exists because the people voted for us to exist, so I tend to think that civic engagement is our birthright. So I want to share briefly a couple of your cohort members who are moving that work forward. Cam, please raise your hand, is doing Get Out the Vote. Cam will help eligible Missouri voters participate in the 2022 general election. This is a really important election. All elections are important, but this one in particular is super important. And so their staff and volunteers will facilitate and notarize absentee ballots every Thursday from 3 to 5 p.m. September 22nd, 29th, and October the 6th, and Saturdays from 3 to 5, September 24th, October 1st, and October the 8th. So thank you for your leadership in this. That Uppity Theater Company, Joan, where are you? There you are. Super important, please write this down. Saturday, September 24th, this coming Saturday from 12:30 to 3. We are going to take the largest photo ever of midterm voters at 1 o'clock. So if you are able to participate, Joan has the information. We'll have activities for kids. We can't get what we need if we don't elect people who are willing to do the work. So civic engagement is year-round. It is important. And we have to stay engaged, from voter education, voting, holding our elected officials accountable. So thank you, Joan, thank you, Lisa, for leaning into this with your leadership, because it all matters. So with that, I am going to welcome Michael Kaiser to the stage, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I feel like it's graduation day. On March 11th of 2020, we announced this program here in St. Louis. That was my very last business trip for 2 years. So it's, for me, very poignant to be back and to see all of you. I felt that a great way to end this program is to really talk about strategic planning. And the reason why I think that's true is because the world has changed in these last 2 years. And our plans need to change. And our plans need to be dynamic, because we don't frankly know what the world will be like 2 years from now. And so the whole concept of planning, good strategic planning, I think, is absolutely central to how we're going to deal with a changing world. So what we're going to do today is, for the first hour or so, we're going to talk about strategic planning. Then we're going to have lunch. Then we're going to have 3 organizations from this cohort talk through a challenge they've had and how they addressed it over these last 2 years. And then we'll finish up with a section on how one actually takes the cycle and implements it for real as you go through life. So that's going to be the structure of the day. As always, even though this is a very formal setting and I'm very high up on the stage, this is a conversation, not a lecture. Questions, comments, arguments, please, I need to hear from you, okay? I love the topic of planning. I know it can be a little dry. I'll try and make it not too boring. But I love the topic of planning because, to be honest, I think most arts organizations don't do strategic planning very well. Because what I find most arts organizations, and I'm not talking about St. Louis, just talking about the world, is that most organizations' strategic plans really read like wishes. We will raise more money, we will engage our community, we will diversify our staff and our board, we will do exciting work, we will do this, we will do that. Those are not plans, those are dreams, those are wishes. And what turns a wish into a plan is actually, how are you going to do it? The thing that drives me the craziest, and I read I can't tell you how many hundreds of strategic plans I read for arts organizations, where an organization's development plan is, we will develop a development plan. And it's like 25% of the plans have that, or we will come up with a plan for building a stronger board. Well, what's the plan for if you're just saying you're going to plan? So I feel like a lot of organizations waste a lot of time in planning. And they sit in rooms and everyone sort of says, what's your favorite strategy? And then everyone argues, and it's so unsatisfying and it's so uncomfortable, and I don't think it results in much. So what I want to do this morning is talk through my framework, the way I think about putting together a plan. And I'm not suggesting this is the only way to do it. Many of you will have your own approaches, which is great. But I do think having some framework, some roadmap for planning is really useful to keep it on track, to keep it efficient, to make sure that the thoughts are integrated, and to make sure you actually end up with something that's implementable, not just something that sounds like a nice set of wishes. And so that's what we're going to talk about this morning, okay, at least for an hour. For me, the first aspect of a good plan is what? What's the first part of a good strategic plan? Anybody? What's the first thing in your plan? I hear different words. I'm going to use the word mission, was one of the words that was said. And I'm going to actually add another word, which is values. And it's a word that Vanessa used, and I think it's critical, and I think it's particularly critical today. What's in a good mission? A good mission talks about what we want to accomplish, who is it for, and where is this? What is the geographic region we're trying to address? That's what I think is in a good mission. What we're trying to do, who we're doing it for, and where. And I think a good mission is characterized by 5 adjectives, all starting with the letter C, so they're easy to remember. The first is that it's clear, that everyone reading it gets the same message. I find there's some mission statements, I don't even understand what they're about, to be honest. And I'm not sure the people in the organization understand what it's about, which means it doesn't mean anything, it's not helpful. It needs to be clear. Number 2, it needs to be concise. Short. Not 3 words, it's not a tagline, it's not just do it. It's not a marketing expression. It's more important than a marketing expression. But it also can't be endless. I had one organization I worked with in Seattle, Washington, that started with a 19-page mission statement. Even the woman who wrote it could not remember what was in it. So it had absolutely no value to the organization. So it should be concise. It should be complete, by which it means it really describes the full arc of what you're trying to do. I hate it when I start working with an organization and I read their mission, which is very clear to me, and I get it, it's this thing. Oh, and we also do this thing over here. Well, why do you do this thing over here? Oh, well, we got a grant for it, or you know that, that's why you're laughing. And the mission has to be complete. It has to describe the full range of what you're going to do, and there can't be those outliers. The fourth is it has to be coherent. And by coherent, it has to make sense. And let me give an example. It's actually an example from the state of Missouri, but I won't get into any trouble because this took place in 1986. So most of you weren't born yet when I started doing some pro bono work. I was running the Kansas City Ballet, and I did some pro bono work for the St. Joseph, Missouri Symphony, which at the time was a volunteer symphony with a budget of about $50,000. And their mission was, our mission is to be a world-class symphony. Now, I'm not someone who believes that money always buys quality, that the bigger organization is better or more inventive than the smaller one. I don't believe that. But I also know you cannot be the Berlin Philharmonic or the London Symphony or the Chicago Symphony or, frankly, the St. Louis Symphony on $50,000 with an all-volunteer orchestra. The distance from where they were to where their mission had them was so far, it wasn't useful. How do you aim to go from where they were to there? That's what I mean by coherent. It has to make sense. If you do avant-garde chamber music, you're not going to have the audience the size of the Muni. You're just not. Sorry. But that's okay, because the number of people who love your work is not a measure of how important you are to society. I learned that working for a really wonderful, wonderful playwright. Some of you may have heard of him. His name is Richard Foreman. Richard Foreman is one of the leading absurdist playwrights in America. Richard Foreman ran a company called the Ontological Hysteric Theater Company in New York. And he's a genius. I didn't understand a word he wrote. I tried. I really tried. I just wasn't smart enough. I went to his shows. He performs in the basement of a church with 99 seats. But Richard Foreman was so distinguished that every major foundation in America gave him money. So he had money from the Ford Foundation and from Mellon and from everybody. And his productions, if you've never seen an ontological hysterical production, we have the materials at our desk to do the sets and costumes. They were string and paper bags. That was it. So he spent like $10 on a production and had $500,000 of funding for it. So his bank account kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And I went to him. I was meant to write his strategic plan, and I said, you know, Mr. Foreman, you have all this cash on hand for these years of money piling up. Why don't you go to a bigger theater? Like, this is so little. It was in the basement of a church. You know, it felt like the basement of a church. And, you know, why don't you do something for more people? And he said, you know, Michael, there are only 99 people a night who want to see my work. And if I go to a bigger house, I either have to change the nature of my work, which is just not what I'm going to do, or I have to lie to people to you know, snooker them to come in to the show. I don't want to do that either. It was such a great learning for me, because what I learned was we don't measure our success by the number of people, the size of the budget. We measure success by the quality of our work and the impact it has on the people we choose to serve. And that's really what I believe about the mission. That's what a good mission is. And so I'm not caught up in the numbers game or the size game or anything like that. What I really want to make sure organizations are really clear is, what exactly are we trying to do? Who are we doing it for? And something about geography, and the reason I mention geography is because I see a lot of organizations, particularly dance companies. We have a dance company here, right? Where are you? I know we have one. There we are, right back there. Who's really are centered in a community or a city or a neighborhood, who are then invited to go to Prague to some international dance festival. And they spend an entire year, all their resources, all their time, all their energy, going outside of their service area. And frankly, they don't come home with much. And so having a sense of sort of what is the scope of who we're trying to influence, I think is really important. By the way, the last C, I didn't tell you the last C. The last C is compelling. It has to compel not just outsiders, but insiders to say, I want to support this. This is part of who I am. This makes sense to me. And the truth is, we have to be so honest about putting this mission together. The other thing I observe about the missions of arts organizations is most of them are very, very bland and unspecific. We bring the beauty of music to the people. And I think the reason why they get so bland is because when we're actually sitting as a group to decide what is our mission going to be, the subconscious goal of everyone in the room is for everyone to leave happy. That is, we don't want to fight. So every time someone says something specific and another person disagrees, they massage it to be even more vague. And so we end up with really vague missions that don't truly express the direction we want to go. And for me, the mission is critical, not just to have a nice statement, not for foundation grants, but because it helps direct us. We have limited resources. Every organization in this room, some of you are very small, some of you are very large, but you all have limited resources. We can't waste anything, so we've got to be so focused on what is it we really want to accomplish. And every time we make our mission vaguer and vaguer and vaguer, we leave room for different people in the organization, board members, staff members, to sort of go off in their own direction, because we haven't really been specific about what are we trying to accomplish. And then we're shocked 3 or 4 or 5 years later where we really haven't moved as far ahead as we'd like. So for me, this has to be really clear and honest. It has to be coherent. It has to be complete. and then it has to be compelling. I want to differentiate, and then I'll open this up for questions. I really want to differentiate mission from values because I think a lot of organizations are confusing the two today. Values are the way we must behave to be true to ourselves. Values are just as non-negotiable as the mission. Values are just as important as the mission. But what I'm observing right now is that there are organizations who have learned that their values maybe weren't the right values, or that they really hadn't thought them through well enough, or that they were too bland and are now getting much more specific and clearer. But some organizations are now putting their values into their mission statement. For some organizations, that's appropriate. There are some organizations who are saying, yes, we are here to fight racism. That is what we're here for, to do. That belongs in our mission. There are other organizations who say, this is a value of ours. We believe in diversity. We believe in equity. Everything we do, we have to keep that in mind. We can't behave differently. We've got to be really clear. But it's not why we exist. And the reason I bring this up, and the reason why I think it's important to think this through and analyze it for your organization, there are going to be different answers for every organization of where we put our values and where we put our mission, is we're confusing some of our donors and our board members and other stakeholders. There are organizations, including some I've worked with here in this city, who have dramatically changed their mission and what they do over the last couple of years. And I don't think they've explained it well enough to their stakeholders, and that gets people confused, and it risks losing resource for the organization. So I think each organization needs to be extremely clear on its values, extremely clear on its mission. They have to commit to both. And they have to be really transparent about what they are and what they're doing to commit to both. And if they do that, then you at least have a sense of direction for your strategic plan. Are there questions or comments on this, or on the dichotomy between mission and values? Any challenges? Are you all happy with your mission statements? Yeah, Pam. There are going to be microphones coming right to your head. It's not on.
Sounds live now.
Now it is.
How often would you say, we're an organization that's been around for quite a while, and we feel really good about our mission and our values. How often would you say you should revisit them before they become like, okay, just complacently there? But they're excellent. We still believe in them. They're compelling. How often?
If you're all happy with it, then you're fine. I'd say every time you do a new strategic plan, which might be every 3, 4, or 5 years, I think it's worth rethinking it. But I'll be honest, when there's turmoil in the world, I'm thinking about my mission and my values a lot. The last 2 years, I think it was really hard to go through these last 2 years and not say, are we really clear on what we're about and what our values are? And I've seen a lot of organizations who said in their values, we value our staff and we value our artists, and they're the most important people that we have to attend to. And then the minute they had some financial problems, just cut them off. Is that living your values? I think we have to really think these through. So I'd say, Pam, I think about them every day in a way, but in a formal sense, at least every time you do a strategic plan, I think you want to sit down and reaffirm and think it. And don't get in love with the language. Get in love with the concepts. Other thoughts or questions?
I have
comments?
a question. Right here. Hello.
Oh, here, hi.
Hi. I'm really enjoying this, just so you know.
Thank you, Jacqueline.
And you mentioned that some people are putting their values into their mission statement, and that you're noticing that that's happening a lot in the last 2 years.
I do.
Any idea as to why? Do you think that people are intentionally doing it, or are they doing it because there is more funding for particular values?
I think it's 3 reasons. There's a group that are really saying, you know what, our mission really is to do this kind of work. We we want to change our mission, and it's fine. You can change your mission. The mission is sacred, but it's not immovable. There's a group that feels pressured to do this. And they think if they stick the word diversity somewhere in their mission statement, they're going to get a pass, which to me is abhorrent. You believe in equity, you believe in diversity because you believe in it and you act on it. You don't stick a word somewhere in your mission statement. That's how I think. And then there's a group that think they're going to get extra funding for sticking stuff in there. I would rather have an organization say, we're here to do Baroque chamber music. That's what we do. We want to do it for everybody, and we want to serve. The who is the whole community, and we're going to work hard in our outreach to bring people who may not think they'd like Baroque chamber music. Our values feature diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we're going to make sure that at every step of the way, we're thinking about that as we plan our strategies. I think that's a more supportable approach than just sticking a few words in the mission statement. Does that make sense to you? And I think we're seeing a lot of performative behavior. And again, there's a cost to that. Not just is it, I think, not sincere, which is a problem, but I also think there's a group of funders / board members / interested parties who get confused when all of a sudden all the language changes and it's not clear exactly why. I thought I was supporting Baroque chamber music. I thought that's what I was about. And absolutely I believe in diversity, but I thought this organization was the one that does Baroque chamber music. All of a sudden it's turning into something different. And I think, is it fair to do that? Absolutely. It's 100% fair to do that. Just know you're doing it and pave the way. Otherwise, what you can end up with is empty audiences or empty coffers because people get confused and they go somewhere where they're less confused. And so I think we really have to be careful in this environment. Okay? Yes, please. We'll go here and then we'll go here.
So do you have any guidance on how to document values and how those get generated? Is that mostly a board function? What is the role of staff in producing those?
It's a good question. I'll talk a little bit out later, but let me answer the question now, Peggy. I believe all planning is board and staff together. I don't believe it's a board function, unless there is no staff, and there are organizations which don't have staff. But if you have board and staff, I don't believe in separating the two groups. The plan is the plan of the organization. It belongs to the whole organization. I don't see how board members do it without the knowledge that the staff brings, but I also don't believe the staff can do it without the power and the imprimatur and the support that the board brings and the knowledge. I think it has to be joint. And yes, I think you sit in a room. Someone, I think, could take a stab at it and bring a proposal. But value statements can sound like motherhood and apple pie, and it's real easy to say, yeah, fine. I believe organizations have to live to those values, not just put them on a piece of paper for them to be real. Okay? Travis.
That actually goes to my question. How important is it, and where have you seen both successes and failures for organizations not operationalizing or behaviorizing their values in a way that when they have a program, they can say this, or an activity or an operation, they say this directly ties to this value of the organization, or it doesn't?
I think it's critical that organizations do operationalize their values, because when they don't, people start mistrusting them. And what's happening, I find, in a lot of organizations, interestingly to me, is it's happening a little less from the outside world and more from the inside staff. I see a lot of younger staff people in cultural organizations who are saying, these people are just not right. These people are not sincere. They don't have integrity. They say these nice flowery things at board meetings, and then they don't do them. They say how important staff is, but then they don't give us benefits, or whatever the thing is. Or they say we believe in diversity, and then we hire one person of color for a staff of 28 and say now we're diverse. So I find that it's internally that we're really losing credibility when we don't live to our values. It can then explode when internal staff make it public, then it becomes a public thing. But I find a lot of the unhappiness is starting inside the organizations. And I think it's our own damn fault. You know? If we're not honest, If we don't have integrity, if we don't mean it, we shouldn't put it on a piece of paper. And I don't believe in just saying things to say, "Phew, we got that one done." I used to believe that there would be a section of my plans, in fact, I would write them for some of your organizations, where I would have a DEIA section of the plan. I don't do it anymore. To me now it's thread throughout every part of the strategy. I don't believe it's separate, because it's a value, and values go throughout everything. Okay. I'm going to move on. Next part of the plan, and this is to me so critical, is a really good look at our environment. If ever we've learned that we can't write a plan just by looking internally, it's the last 2 years. We have to look at what's going on in the world around us. We have to take that into account. There's not one arts organization in America that can ignore the environment in which we operate and just go happily down their way and say, we're going to be fine. It just doesn't happen. So we have to do this. And this is what I find missing in most organizations' plans. Or I see a lot of plans where they put down some statistics, turn the page, and never refer to it again in the plan. That's not what I'm talking about here. I look at the environment from 3 perspectives myself when I'm working on a plan. The first is, what are the big national trends? What's big happening nationally that we have to take into account in our planning? Who can name something, a national thing, not having to do with your art form or anything, something that's happening nationally in the arts that affects arts organizations? Anyone? Inflation. Mm-hmm. How can you write a plan and not take inflation into account, right? What else?
Climate change.
Climate change. Huge focus for so many organizations. How do we reduce our carbon footprint? What else? Ed? COVID, of course. I mean, COVID, continues to challenge us, right? We're not done with COVID. Whether you want to call it a pandemic or not, I'm not getting into politics today, doesn't matter. But we are still affected. We still have 30, 40% of our audience that's not coming back into our theaters, so our earned income is just lower. It just is. So that's one. Technology, right? We see big technology changes. That's affected the arts, particularly in the last 2 years, but even before. Reduction in subscribers, the less predilection of people to subscribe to a season. That's a national thing. So there's several of them, and you'll pick the own ones that matter to you and your organization. But there's an awful lot. The reduction in arts education in the public schools, goodness, that's a 40-year trend that's affected every one of us, right? This we have to take into account, not just list it. This is not just a list and you turn the page. This is, what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about inflation? How does that impact the way we budget or the way we think about next season? What are we going to do about the fact that now all of a sudden we still have residual COVID? How does that affect our planning? These trends affect us. They don't just exist. And so we have to keep them in our heads as we write our plan. The second thing that I look at is art form specific stuff. Stuff that's happening in a particular art form. We have some theater companies here. Who wants to tell me something that's happening in the theater world? What's something you see happening in theater, somebody?
Reducing the number of work days for actors and duration of hours called during a rehearsal period.
We see you, White American Theater has resulted in a change of the work week for theaters. So very different, teching a show, rehearsing a show. We have very different constraints now. That is theater specific. It's a great example. I also think about the increase in immersive theater and as a trend in theater of immersive experience. It's also happening in the museum world, but it started really in the theater world. I think the reason why we see so much more immersive work is because younger people don't just want to sit and watch something anymore. Younger people want to do something, and immersive work has really brought younger people into the theater because they like to actually participate in some way. So the second thing we have to do is be really clear what's happening in our art form? What's happening in children's courses? Children's courses are changing. Children's courses are playing a larger social role than they used to play, right? I remember, 30 years ago when a children's course, your parents took you there, you sang and you went home. And now we have a lot of children who need after-school help, or they need some tutoring, or they need all kinds of support structures. And we're thinking about our art, our whole, what we offer differently. And that is part of the environment. And then we have to look locally and say, what's happening in our city? What's different in our city? What's different in St. Louis? What makes St. Louis different from Kansas City, Memphis, Chattanooga, Nashville? What makes St. Louis so unusual, do you think? I've been here for 20 years. High density, you have so many. You said 733, I think was the number you used, Vanessa. Just in St. Louis City, 733. Oh, so many. I mean, you got to fund those, get audiences for those, compete for visibility with those, all of that good stuff. I so honor all of you for surviving in this community. What else is true in St. Louis? Can you think of something really good in St. Louis? Pam, can you talk? Can you wait for the microphone? Just wait. It's coming. We're recording, and that's one of the reasons we want to make sure.
Thank you. Yes. Well, there's a great, wonderful donor base.
There is.
Here.
Oh my goodness! And some of those donors just give immense amounts of money. This is different. Not all of you get that money, so sometimes I'm sure it can feel not so great. But the truth is, you live in a city where there are some mammoth amounts of money being given to projects. And you have a very different kind of individual donor base in St. Louis than I observe in so many of the other cities in which I work. I do a lot of work in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania has a wonderful, thriving arts community. They have great symphony and they have great dance, and all the way up and down the line, the August Wilson Center. It's a great group of organizations, but all the money comes from foundations. And if you go to an individual in Pittsburgh and ask for $1,000, they'll think you're asking for $1 million. They can't believe it. $1,000? It's different. It's different in different cities. We got to understand that. Please take some time as you work on your strategic plan to think about what's going on nationally, what's going on in our art form, and what's going on in our city. And don't do this in 10 minutes because Michael told you to. Do this, really think about this, and think about its impact on your organization, and think about what does it mean for how you have to navigate the world. If you don't, you're not going to have all the information you need to go forward. No coach of a football team would go out without knowing what the playing field is like or what the other team is like. And we can't do that in the arts and think we can just look inside. And yet so many plans just ignore this or pay lip service to it. They'll say, we have 387,000 people in our city and 25,000 square feet of space or whatever, and that's that. And saying, now we're done with the environment. That's not the environment. That's not important. What's important are these issues. Once we've done that, now we can look inside of ourselves and do what I call an internal analysis. What is the internal analysis? The internal analysis is where are we starting from as an organization? Where are we strong and where are we weak? And I know you're all used to SWOT analysis, which puts strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and strengths on one page, and I hate SWOT analysis. I just hate them because they're so superficial, and they're just like, everyone says, okay, we have to have 6 for each. Let's put them down. Now we're done with that. Let's turn the page. Whew, we did that. That's not what I'm talking about. I want a thorough evaluation of where you're strong and where you're weak. And I do a few things to figure that out. Number one, I read data. I look at your numbers. I look at 10 years of financials. I look at where the money's come from and where the money's going. I don't just assume, oh, everything's fine. I also compare your numbers to your peers. I do a very simple analysis. You can do this easily. I take the org that I'm working with, and then I take a couple of peer organizations. And if I either get this information from an industry association, from the other organizations themselves, or at last resort, the 990s, which are legal filings that are online for every 501c3 in America. And I'll say, okay, let's start with revenue. How much money is coming from tickets? How much money is coming from educational programming? How much money is coming from foundations? ... And then I look at the percentages of where we're getting our money, and I look at the percentages where organizations I think of like mine are getting their money. This tells me a lot. This tells me a lot. If there's an organization you can compare yourself to that's getting twice as much money as you are from their ticket sales as a percent, why are they selling so much better than you are? What's going on? Maybe that's a strategy of yours. Maybe you're serving a different audience and you want to keep your prices really low because of your mission. That's great. There's a reason to have lower ticket revenue then. Or maybe you're just really bad at marketing. Or maybe your art's not good enough. You know, we have to consider these. We cannot go into planning if the mode is everything we do is wonderful and we all have to praise each other at every planning session. That's not planning. Planning is about honesty. But I like to do this. I do the same thing for expenses. And I see, for example, how much we're spending, what percentage of our budget we're spending in art making versus how much percentage the others are. And if I see the other organizations are spending a lot more money in art making than we are, that gets me thinking, are we spending enough on our art? Are we really investing enough, or have we diverted too much money to some administrative functions? Does that make sense, what I'm saying? I learn from that. That helps me do my internal analysis. This is an honest appraisal of where we are area by area in our organization. Programming, marketing, fundraising, board. Remember the board audit we talked about in the sessions? We do the board audit, and that finds its way right into the plan. How well does our board fulfill the 5 key functions of the board? That goes right into here. The staff. Do we have the right staff? Is it organized properly? Do we have enough staff? We've got to be really clear and open and honest here. The other way I get information for this is I do interviews. I talk to lots of people inside and outside the organization. I love talking to former employees and former board members because I tend to get more truth than when I talk to current employees and current board members. But I do like to talk to all kinds of people and have them give me their thoughts. And what you see patterns emerging. You realize here's really where there's a challenge for this organization. And planning is about solving those challenges. Planning is not about just saying we're going to serve the world better. Do you understand these two? Do they make sense? They're not that hard to do. They do take a little bit of time. You don't do it in an hour each. But if you don't do them, you don't have the foundation to write your strategic plan. These 3 boxes are the foundation of the plan. What do we want to do? What's going on around us? Where are we strong and weak? This gives you all the information now to start writing strategies. That's the next section. And here's where we try and solve the problems. But we're solving problems that we've identified in these 2 boxes rather than just saying, what's everyone's favorite strategy? I think every invitation should be green. I had one organization I was working with, a board member said, the most important strategy for us is we have to change the way the traffic light changes as you exit the parking garage. It takes too long to turn green, cars back up, people are unhappy. That's the key strategy for our organization. Oh, I've heard some whopper strategies. I ran a very big ballet company, American Ballet Theater, and one of my board members said, strategy's easy. Double all the ticket prices. I can afford it. The same gentleman said, do we really need an orchestra? Yes. Why don't you just have a man wave his arms in the pit and play a recording there? No one can see the orchestra. It's God's honest truth. People have wacko strategies. The idea of this is to tell a story. What do we want to do? What's going on around us? What are the assets we bring and the challenge we bring? Now, how are we going to solve those? One section leads to the other, and the strategies have to reflect everything that came before it. The strategies are not just an amalgam of everyone's wacko ideas. And when I'm writing the strategies, not surprising to anyone here who's been part of this program for 2 years, is I think about my cycle, which virtually everyone in the room has seen a presentation or heard about the cycle. I know you're bored to death of it. I won't go through it again. But this is how I organize my strategies. Programming, programmatic and institutional marketing, both but separate. How are we going to build our family? How are we going to get the resource we need so that we can do more great programming? And how does this change and grow year by year? So I have a programming section. I see too many arts plans, strategic plans, which never mention the art. Or they mention it in vague general terms. We will continue to do great work. That's their artistic strategy. That's not an artistic plan. What pieces are you going to do? In what order? Why? How are you going to build audience excitement? What's that big project 3 years from now that's going to change the way your family views you? What is it? Be specific. How do you develop a marketing plan if you don't know what the work is you're marketing? I don't know how to do that. So I start with a really detailed artistic plan. Do I leave room for spontaneity? Absolutely. Do I leave room for something that just emerges, a great opportunity? Absolutely. But I need to have in my plan, and you heard in the very first seminar that I did online of this program, you heard me talk about planning your art 3 to 5 years in advance, and you saw me write that chart with the little lines for different projections each year. That's why I do this. And it's the only way to motivate the rest of the plan, I think, because I don't know how you write a strategic plan for an arts organization that doesn't talk about the art you're going to do. What are those big institutional marketing moments you're going to create? That has to be in the plan. It can't be we'll have a plan for institutional marketing or we'll develop an institutional marketing calendar. That's my favorite. That's not a plan. That's a generalized wish. What are you going to do? Start talking about it. The specifics are what makes the plan implementable. The reason why Vanessa can talk about what RAC is implementing is because our plan has implementable steps in it, not just vague general direction. You can't do a plan without specifics. And so I want specifics on programming and marketing and fundraising and board development and organizational structure and staffing. And for some of you, venue, not for others. For some of you, touring, and for others, not. Different of you have different areas. And as I said before, I fully confess, I used to have a DEIA section of the plan. I no longer do that. That's now infused into every single thing here. If I'm talking about building the size of my family, the question is, who am I trying to add to my family? Where am I deficient? What do I really need to do to achieve the who of my mission? Here's where it goes right back to mission. If my mission is to serve everyone in the community, and everyone I serve is 60 years and older and white, then I'm not fully realizing my mission, and so my strategies for building my family have to address that. What am I going to do about it? What specific things am I going to do about it? What tools am I going to use? Otherwise, you won't do it. So the strategies are lists of specific things that are going to help you address your weaknesses, build on your strengths, cope with the environment so that you can achieve your mission. Does that make sense? It's not a bunch of, we're going to do better at this. We're going to work harder at this. I always love that statement. We're going to work harder at this. And you know what? Everyone's working so hard. There's not one of you in this room who doesn't work hard at your job. I know that. So to say you're going to work harder doesn't ring true to me. What are you going to do different? What are you going to do specifically? That has to be here. Any questions on this? This is the key box. This is the heart of the plan. Any questions? Yes, Dave? A microphone's coming, Dave.
We're undergoing a transition in leadership, and we're going to be we're right now gathering our data for our strategic planning process, we're going to change, it's going to be a change. How do you manage that in terms of, does that filter down through everything?
In terms of the data itself, or?
In terms of just the leadership change, is going to be probably some different directions internally. We're not going to change our complete operation. But.
I think when you have a leadership change, you almost have to do a new plan, and you have to allow the new leader to have a big voice in that plan, but the board also has to maintain its objectivity in that process as well. You can't just say we have a new leader who gets to decide everything and no one else has a voice. I don't think that works very well either. And again, there's some examples in this community where that was done and not successfully. So the new leader has to feel empowered to add their own creativity and their own voice and their own thoughtfulness. But the board and the rest of staff has to also be encouraged to participate actively in that process so that you come up with a plan that reflects what the whole organization wants to do. And so yes, I think it filters through the whole plan, not just changing little pieces of it here and there. Does that make sense to you? Okay. Any other questions on strategies? All right. Next, 2 more sections, I promise, that's it. Next, an implementation plan. I'm not happy just to have my list of strategies for 2 reasons. Number 1, they're all not going to happen at the same time. If I'm writing a 5-year plan, my strategies are happening over 5 years, not over 1 year. I'm not writing a 1-year plan. And you can't do it all at once, because things hopefully will build over time, or your strategies will help you build over time. The second reason I do an implementation plan is, if you're not explicit, then no one thinks they're responsible for getting any of it done. So I make a very simple chart. For each strategy, I say, who is chiefly responsible for getting that strategy finished? And I say, by when? It's the simplest chart to write, but it takes thought. What is the order that we're going to do these things? We can't do it all at once. We can't add 10 staff people at once. First of all, we can't afford it, and secondly, we wouldn't know how to bring them into the organization and socialize them. So in which order are we doing all these different strategies? Who's responsible for it? This is critical. I find if I'm assigning every single strategy to one person, then I have a poor organization structure or the wrong staffing. And the when. I can organize this chart if you do it in Excel. I don't know how to use Excel, sorry. But if you do, you can organize it by the who. And so everyone has their work plan. And now you go to each staff member and you talk through the plan and you talk through their role, and they look and say, yeah, I can do these in these time frames. This makes sense. Or they'll say, I can't get all this done, or I don't know how to do this. And then you have to figure out, okay, if they don't know how to do it, let's figure out how we're going to figure out who's going to do it or how we're going to educate this person to do it. No point assigning something to someone who doesn't know how to do it and then just leaving it at that, because it's not going to get done. So we can organize it by the who, but we also can organize it by the when, and essentially have a calendar of implementation. Why is this useful? It's really useful for boards, for board meetings. Every board meeting, you can say, here are the 12 things we were supposed to do by this board meeting. Did we do it or didn't we do it? If we did it, great. If we didn't do it, why didn't we do it? Did we not do it because we don't have the resources? Did we not do it because we think it's wrong? Because the world changes. Do we not do it because we think we forgot? Something else is more important. Our director keeps changing his or her mind. They never can settle on something, so we're constantly doing 8 different things, and we never really know that we stick to a plan. What is it? And this gives the board an opportunity to oversee the implementation of the plan in a way that's not intrusive. It's not it's not accusatory. It's just, here are the things we're supposed to do, here are the ones we did, here are the ones we still have yet to do. Some organizations like to color code it. You know, green, it's done, red, it never started, orange, it's in progress. But just to give the board a chance to really oversee. Remember, the first job of the board was to participate actively in developing and overseeing the implementation of the strategic plan. That was job one for the board. This allows the board to do that in an easy way. It also allows the manager of the organization, the head of the organization, staff head, to make sure, have a checklist, essentially. What do we have to get done? What isn't getting done? And if we don't have this kind of chart, I promise you half your strategies won't happen. Because some of them are small, or some of them are only supposed to start 3 years from now. It's real easy to forget. Does this chart make sense to people? Do you all have this in your plans? How many organizations have this in their plans, honestly? A couple of you, okay. Congratulations. Think about this. It's so great to go to a funder and say, we did our strategic plan last year, and we have done every strategy, everything we said we were going to do, and here's the result, and we want to report that to you because it shows that our plan is working. You know, this gives you so much information to use in your fundraising, not just in the way you manage the organization. And then there's the very end of the plan. And those are the financials. The financials are an income statement for the next however many years your plan is. Let's say 5 years. I'm just using that as a standard. A lot of organizations do 5-year plans. There's no magic to a 5-year plan. If you're a very young organization, 3 years might be as much as you can think, or even 2. If you're doing a big capital project that's going to take 7 years, you might want to think 7 years ahead. It's up to you. But what's your income statement for these years? And I do something very specific in mine. I say, here's the base financials we would have if we didn't do our strategies. Here's what we think we'd get in income from foundations and corporations and individuals, what we'd sell in tickets, what we would spend on this and this and this. And then for every strategy, what are the expenses and what are the revenues? So I can identify that this strategy costs us in the early and brings the money at the end, or whatever the pattern is. But that way the board and the staff together can say, is this strategy really worth it? Not that we measure our mission by financials, but at the end of the day, we have to have a financial plan that at least balances going forward. We have to be sustainable. We cannot plan for deficits. I know there are some people who have the conventional wisdom that it's okay for not-for-profits to earn a deficit that's natural. It isn't natural. It creates death. What is natural for a not-for-profit is not to be for-profit. That is, we are not for trying to have as big a bottom line, as good a bottom line as possible. But what we are for is sustainability, because if we're not sustainable, we will not work on our mission forever. And we want this to happen. So we have to have an income statement that makes sense. And then when I'm working on a plan and I do the first iteration of the financials and I realize it's not in balance, I have to go back to the strategies and say, okay, what are we going to change? What are we going to do differently? Not just how are we going to fudge the numbers, but actually, what are we going to do differently? Or how are we going to implement in a different order or different sequence or different speed to make sure that we have the financials that are sustainable? This is particularly important right now because we are facing a challenging 2 years ahead. You've all done great work to get through these last 2 years, but I have to tell you, I think the next 2 years are going to be harder than the last 2 years. There's no more SFOG, there's no more PPP, there are no more of those extra foundation grants that came during COVID. There's no more of donors being willing to give you resources even though you're not really serving them at the moment. I don't think that's going to continue the way it has. We're facing a hard time. So we have to be really smart and honest in our financials and come back to our strategies and say, how are we going to adjust those strategies given the world we live in? I'm a big believer that in the environment we're in, it's much more about quality than it is about quantity right now in the arts. I think for many years, we kept trying to do more and more and more, and that was the way we demonstrated we were of value to our community. And I believe now we really have to think more about quality of the work we do and how we can do stuff that's really spectacular, but maybe do a little less if that's the only way we can balance our budgets. This, to me, is the structure of a good strategic plan. What are we trying to accomplish? What's going on around us that's going to influence us? How do we deal with those factors, and where are we strong and weak? How are we going to build on those strengths? How are we going to overcome our weaknesses? How are we going to implement those strategies, and who's going to do it? And do the financial results suggest that we are sustainable? Yes, Mont.
Michael, you've given this important framework. Can you offer a framework for the oversight of its implementation? And how do you think about revisiting your implementation plan?
It's a great question. My answer might seem poofy to you. If I'm running an organization, I think about my strategy, not my strategic plan, not the document. I think about my strategy every single day. I'm constantly thinking, particularly as something happens in the environment or some new piece of information. You know, the environment changes. All of a sudden, we have another organization doing what we're doing. Or, you know, one of the big things that's changed in our environment, got to be realistic here, Netflix has gotten a lot better. It's not just really potent, it's actually better than it was. And there are a lot of people who are sitting home. And COVID makes it easier to sit home. And inflation makes it easier to sit home. And so I'm constantly, okay, what's going on and how is that changing? So I'm thinking about that. Or something happens, a good thing happens. We get a huge grant we weren't expecting. That changes the world for us. Or we lose a grant. A major corporation stops funding the arts, for instance. Not that that would ever happen in St. Louis. But we have to think about what's the implication and what are we going to do about that. And so I'm constantly then recasting my strategies. So my strategic plan is not a document. I mean, it is, when I write a plan, it's a document. I don't want to say it's not physical. But I don't think of it as that. I think about it as what's in the mind. And it's one of the reasons why I like this to be a story, because it's a story that not just I hold in my mind, but my senior staff hold in my mind and my board leadership holds in their mind. And we can talk shorthand, saying, this big thing is changing, we need to adjust this, so we have to change our implementation. Because for me, the way you ensure implementation is to make sure that you appreciate your implementation plan's not going to be you're not going to implement exactly what you put in your strategic plan, because the world does change. So for me, it's a thought process that's constantly happening, and I believe certainly the staff leader has to be doing that, and ideally board leadership and other senior staff are doing that as well, and so that we can constantly say, we have to readjust. We can't do it this way. This isn't going to work right now. Let's try it that way. We all did that in a major way in March of 2020, but that's a gross example. Every day the world is changing. Every day we get some news about ourselves. We sold much better on this than we thought, or we sold much worse on this than we thought. Well, that has to influence, okay, if all of a sudden we do a show and we're selling 30% less than we used to, what does that mean about the environment? What does that mean about the way we have to work? How are we going to change our strategy and our implementation? So for me, it's not so much as overseeing it, it's about adjusting it. Does that make sense? And I think it's the adjusting that is something that we as arts managers do, I think, a lot, but what we don't necessarily do is communicate it up and down the chain. And so we see it how it has to change. Others just see it as they're changing direction, and then they stop believing in the plan. They say, why'd we do the plan? Everything's different. Yes.
Michael, thank you for all the work that you've been doing and your staff for these 2 years. It's been very challenging. So we know that not only is the environment, the general environment changing, but the media environment is really changing.
Hugely.
And I mean, I can't always tell who's on first. I can't always tell who you contact about stories.
You're a hun-
Websites are not clear. There's an increase in pay to play, and a real complexity to the media environment. And I was hoping that you could talk, I don't know if
Happy
this
to talk about it, but let me
Yes.
just say it fits right into this framework. That is,
Okay.
these are national trends. There's a lot less coverage in newspapers nationally about the arts. The New York Times, right? The New York Times, read how few stories every day now are about the art forms that you work in. You're going to see that compared to 20 years ago, 30 years ago, it's less than half the amount of coverage. That's sort of that's one that does a lot of arts coverage. In a lot of cities in which I work, there's no longer an arts reporter. None. So we have to find new ways. So this is a perfect example of this. We just didn't identify that in our discussion, but that's one of the trends we have to see, which is it's harder to get coverage. So what is our strategy going to be? What are we going to do about that? How do we influence people if we don't have the newspaper or magazines or probably television? Particularly for those of you who work in arts education, where I find newspapers write one arts education story a year, and they don't care what it is as long as they tick the box. They don't care how good the program is. They just write the one story. They have the picture of the little kids doing something, and now they're done with it. What are we going to do about it? How do we use social media to address that? I believe a lot in how do we work in smaller groups, one-on-one. I believe a lot more in personal interaction that we need to address. How do we use virtual? I believe one of the great tools during the pandemic, and I advised every organization I talked to, and it was about 1,000, which was do online town halls. Invite anyone to come, not just donors, invite anyone to come to a town hall and talk through what are you doing during COVID, what are your plans, what's going to be exciting in the future, not just complaining, but what are we doing and how are we moving forward? How do we start to meet people and address people in a way that we can with much less media involved? That's part one. Part two is what's the most exciting thing you can do that's going to get not just the media, but people talking and getting them to pay attention to you. And there are examples of that in St. Louis, and there are examples of that throughout the country of organizations doing really amazing things. And when you do a really amazing thing, people go, wow, that's cool. So it's not impossible. It just takes more planning than it used to. It used to be you could send out a press release and you'd get a story in the newspaper. That doesn't exist anymore. But what does still exist is having a relationship with a press person. Please don't just send press releases to a newspaper and think you're going to get coverage. You're not going to get coverage. Take the reporter out to lunch. Figure out who does write in your city on your topic. Invite them to lunch. Reporters love free food. They just love free food. Or just take them out for a donut. But always involve food. And talk through the exciting project you have. But we tend to do a lot of capital letters in the arts. Everything's thrilling, everything's amazing, everything's wonderful. Don't lie to the press either. Really pick the thing that's really special. Invite the journalist to lunch. Talk about the project. That's the way to get press, even in this day and age. So there are ways to get some, but it's much harder, and you'll get much less than you used to. So you've got to make up for it. That's a national issue that has to be addressed in our strategies. We can't have a press strategy that just looks like our press strategy from 20 years ago. We can't sell tickets the way we did 20 years ago. The way people get their information is changing hugely. We have to acknowledge that in the environment and deal with it in our strategies. How do you put this plan together? I suggest you put together a committee of people, board and staff, 8, 10, 12 people, not 300 people, not two people, who work section by section. Ideally, you have one person who's willing to do the work. That could be an internal person, that could be a volunteer, or it could be a paid consultant, whatever works for your organization. I like it when someone does, not for the mission has to come from the organization, but for the other sections, they do a first pass, and they bring it, and they say, here's what we see, what do you see? And do you agree with the data we've collected about the environment and our analysis and the impact, or not? Do you agree with here's what we've heard about you, here's what we think are the strengths and weaknesses, do you agree or not? Let's hash it out. And I find if one person does that and brings it to a planning committee, which meets, once a month or whatever for a few hours, you can work your way through this. But it does take time to do a good plan. And I want to, before we go to questions and end this section, I just want to say, please, if there's one thing I want you to take away from this section, it's this. You cannot write a strategic plan at a board retreat. Board retreats are great for all kinds of things, but when it comes to writing a strategic plan, they are the devil's spawn. You cannot sit in a room for 2 days and write a whole plan. And the reason you can't do that is you don't have time to think and create. This is an analytical and creative process. This takes thoughtfulness and time and angst to come up with the right answers. It's not about filling out pages so that all the sections are complete. You cannot do that in 2 days. You don't have all the data at hand in 2 days. You don't have the time to really let ideas germinate. I've written so many plans in my career, and I can't tell you how many times, the day after I write a strategy, or 2 days or 3 days, I say, oh my God, that's awful. How did I write that? That doesn't make any sense, or that's not the best answer. You've got to have time for that. That can't happen in a board retreat. Give yourself the luxury of time. Don't rush your planning activity. Take your time. Take 4, 5, 6 months to get this whole thing done smartly and well. And when you're done, you don't just have a great roadmap for your organization. You have the very best fundraising and board member solicitation tool you can have. Much better than any fundraising brochure or any marketing brochure. This plan, carefully crafted, is something you can bring to someone you want to bring on a board and say, here's where we're going. This plan is what you can show to a serious funder and say, we've really thought, we have problems. Here are the problems. We know them. You know them. We know them. But we've thought this through, and here's what we're doing about it. And we're specific, and we're honest, and we're intentional, and we've been smart about the way we've thought about our funding. So you can trust that your money will be stewarded well by us. This is your best fundraising tool. This is your best new board member solicitation tool, if it's done well. If it's just a bunch of airy-fairy statements, we will be brilliant and we will raise money, no one's going to believe it. It doesn't help you. So do your planning smartly. Do it thoroughly. Take your time at it. Okay? Any last questions or comments before we break for lunch? Yes?
We are getting ready to do our next strategic plan in 2023, and we are guilty of using the SWOT. I know. But we do have new board members, new staff. It is a collaborative process for us. And whereas the board does, over the last 3 years, they have, every board meeting, we review the major intentions of the completed strategic plan. So for next year, we will not use SWOT. We will go through.
And by the way, if anyone says you have to do SWOT, you're doing it. You're just breaking it into 2 pieces, right? It's not that you're not doing that kind of thinking. You're just not throwing it away on a piece of paper.
We'll use this framework. But, and also taking into consideration, when we wrote that strategic plan, of course, the world wasn't really in chaos at that time. Should we, when we redo our 2023 strategic plan, should we look at the previous plan first, or should we just scrap it and
No, don't scrap it.
start?
I would look at it. I would see what's in it that's really wonderful, that either wonderful information or wonderful ideas for the future that you haven't done. I would incorporate those where you can. I would also see what you didn't do and why didn't you do them. Was it COVID? Was it really wasn't such a good idea? Or was it we were too wildly ambitious, it's never gonna happen? So I would learn from what didn't happen. And I'd also evaluate the things you did do and did they work out well for you? I think there's an awful lot to learn from the last plan. I would not throw it out. But I also wouldn't just take it and, cut out, white out a few words and stick in the new words and say, now we're done. Organizations do that. It's just, I'm sure you're going to do a thoughtful plan, I can already tell. I'm completely convinced. Any other questions for today? If not, thank you so much. We're going to now break for lunch. Lunch is up on the 4th floor. And we're going to get back at 12:30 sharp. And we're going to hear from 3 of your colleagues talking about the work they've been doing for the last 2 years, okay? So please have a good lunch. Thank you.
Do what you do and come on up after the presentation is complete. We've got about 20 minutes for each session. And what we've asked colleagues for our friends to do is to say, here is something that we worked on in the program. This is what we got done. These are the challenges to remain. And would you please, as a group, contribute your ideas as to how we might meet these remaining challenges? So they're going to end with a question or with a challenge, and the idea is that we help contribute to their forward thinking on that topic. All right, so please don't be shy. And Marie and Abby will have microphones to facilitate your comments as appropriate. So with no further introduction or ado, Jacqueline, Executive Director from St. Louis Artworks. Come on up. Thank you, Jacqueline.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. All right, thank you very much. I like that a little bit better. Thank you all for the opportunity to be here and to present St. Louis Artworks to this cohort. One of the things that we know is that everybody in this room may not be familiar with St. Louis Artworks. So we want to share who we are, what we do, and how long this organization has been around. St. Louis Artworks has been in the St. Louis region for 27 years. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, I like that. We work with young people as an art education program, and hopefully this, our mission falls in line with Michael's approval that, that we provide art education, essential job skills, and exposure and career opportunities through paid apprenticeships. So one of the difference with St. Louis Artworks is that we actually do pay the youth that work with our organization. We are a year-round program, summer, spring, and fall. We are in the middle of our fall session right now, and we are very happy to have 47 youth that we're working with. So before I get started, I want to first of all thank the DeVos Institute and RAC for this opportunity to be a part of this program. I came in at the middle after it had started. I actually started with St. Louis Artworks at the end of March of 2021. Yes, 2021. During the last 2 years, I've lost years and months, so sometimes I have to rethink. But it was a great opportunity for being a new executive director with this organization to be a part of this DeVos Institute and training. It, for me, gave me a good opportunity to transition into the position, and it also kind of provided me with some onboarding opportunities as well, because prior to me starting, the the vice chair and the chair of our board were meeting with representatives from DeVos. And so it helped me to understand where they stood, what they thought, and where they were. Also, before I go any further, I have to recognize and acknowledge my small but mighty staff. St. Louis Artworks, we have 4 staff members. Myself, a program manager who is part-time, assistant director who is full-time, and a grants manager. And we are a very small but mighty staff. Sabrina Silvers, my assistant director, is here. And Tyler Hood, my program manager, is also present. I would not be able to do 4% of what I'm able to do without the staff that is working very hard with us. And they are very dedicated to the youth that we serve in St. Louis. Our youth come from all over St. Louis City, St. Louis County, as well as Illinois. And as often is said, they are in underrepresented neighborhoods, underserved communities, and we want to make sure that St. Louis Artworks is a place and a space where they can be themselves. And it also is a job opportunity, so they get an opportunity to learn and to grow. That is extremely important to us. That is one of those values that we continue, that is a thread throughout everything that we do. We want to make sure that we are giving them those opportunities. As I was thinking about one of the challenges, and I do say one of the challenges that we have in running a small nonprofit, the main thing that concerned me, actually, when I started with St. Louis Artworks and when I was being interviewed by the board, I told them, I said, St. Louis Artworks is one of the best kept secrets in St. Louis, and it shouldn't be. Because of the work that we do, because of the impact that we have on youth and that we have had on youth over the last 27 years, because of the recognition that St. Louis Artworks has actually received from national organizations, and because of the need for this organization, not only in our community, but in the nationwide, it needs to be known. St. Louis Artworks needs to be known. So I came in and understood why we had those challenges that we had and why we continue to have some of the challenges that we have. Institutional marketing. We need to develop an institutional marketing plan. During the pandemic, we lost our communications staff member. And so we did not have that individual that was solely focused, and that is solely focused on being able to market not only our institution, but our programs and everything that we do. There is also a lack of formalized collaborations that was continuing, and I don't know whether or not that changed because of the pandemic or whether or not that changed because of the fact that we did switch over in executive directors. The former executive director had been there for over 25 years. And so, as you know, St. Louis can be rather cliquish. And you know, you connect with the people that you connect with, and others have to prove themselves. I knew walking in this door that I had to prove myself. As you will if you take a look at my bio, I've been in this game for over 30 years. Yes, I was 2 years old when I got started, and I'm sticking to it. But the other thing we had was an inconsistent social media engagement. And I wanted to take a look at that and see what it was that we could do. So some of the strategies that we implemented and to make sure that the word got out. I mean, we take pictures everywhere. We photograph everything. We try to identify and we try to begin to network with individuals and create word of mouth. We created a consistent e-blast. We opened up a community open house where we invited community members, parents, students in so they can get a look at who St. Louis Artworks was and also ask any questions that they may have. We developed a structured social media campaign, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. If you like us, if you connect with us, follow us, you will see virtually everything that we do. And even though I still don't have a communications specialist, I make sure that that's done on a regular basis because that's one of my roles. We intentionally participate in events and festivals. We develop long-term relationships with our fellow peer groups and community organizations, and we are improving our support and collaborations with fellow youth-based organizations. As a result, we have formalized relationships with the Delmar Main Street, the Kemper Museum, Washington University, amongst others. We have reestablished relationships with St. Louis Art Museum, and we are much more active as participants in art fairs, vendor opportunities, community events, and we also initiated additional partnerships. As we continue to do what have been doing over the last 6 months, we've watched our social media followers and pages increase. We've received more recognition. We recently had an article in CNN. Monat, which was an international hair care company in St. Louis, came to St. Louis for a convention, 20,000 participants, contacted St. Louis Artworks to do live art. We just had a auction at Sotheby's. Thank you, Sotheby's. And we have increased our retention rate by about 65% of youth apprentices. And I could tell you a little bit more in terms of, we have 87% improvement in art skills for our youth. Those numbers are very important. But I want to tell you a real quick story, and that's why I have the word "the whiz" out there. I happened upon a conversation with a youth apprentice and some of my staff members, and she looked up to me and she said, this place reminds me of the Wiz. I said, the Wiz? Why the Wiz? She said, I don't know, it's just the way that this place feels. It kind of reminds me of the Wiz. I said, okay, if this reminds you of the Wiz, then who am I? She said, you're the witch. Yeah. Okay, now, that's a lot of witches in the Wiz. Which one am I? Let's be careful. She said, no, you're the witch. When Dorothy was in the poppy seed field, she said, you're the witch that came to the poppy seed field and led Dorothy on the right path. That was my response. That's the impact that we want to have on our youth. That's what I'm talking about. That's what St. Louis Artworks is. Those are the stories that we want to tell. We do still have remaining challenges. We are still understaffed. We are stretched to our limit. We do still require more hours than we have time. However, we're making that impact. And there are several things that we are still wanting, and have to ask that question real quick because I think I only have 2 minutes. How do we transfer the dedication and commitment and the values into funding support? And how, tell me please, how can we increase our staff? Thank you. Marie, do I still have a minute? Any questions, comments, concerns? Oh, good. I told you everything you needed
Jacqueline, this is Brett, way back here in the back of the room. I have one for you. Jacqueline, what is the budget size of artworks at this point?
Right now, we are at 680,000.
It's amazing what you do with 680,000, number one. Number two, in my mind, these two questions are sort of related. Because in order to increase staff capacity, you probably need some more money, or you got to cut back on doing some of the work that you're doing so people have more time to do what they do. That latter one is really tough and usually not terribly palatable to cut back on the work. So it seems to me that you're probably in a situation where you're saying we want to raise some more money or make some more money so we can hire some more people over time. And with a budget of $600,000, because your presentation was largely focused on marketing, my head goes to, amongst whom are we producing visibility? Mm-hmm. With institutional marketing, it's tempting to say, let's be as famous as we can be amongst as many people as possible. But at the end of the day, it's unlikely that the gentleman on the corner who hears about you once or twice is going to make a decision 3, 6, 9 months from now that's going to really help. They may become a volunteer, maybe they will, but at the end of the day, with the $600,000 budget, if there were 8 or 10 yeses next year, just 8 or 10 people who had the ability to help financially, $1,000, $5,000, maybe a grant at $10,000. If there were just 8 or 10 people who said yes next year, it might get you close to an additional 5 or 7 or maybe even 10% against that 600,000, which would be a start in the direction of being able to hire more people. So with marketing, none of us are Coca-Cola or Amazon or Nike. You know, this idea that we're going to be a household name, I think, is an alluring one. It's incredibly difficult to achieve. And so the question that I have is, who's that group of 30 or 40 people, program officers at foundations, maybe an individual or two, maybe some folks in government, maybe some key partners who can help decrease the cost of doing parts of your business? Who are the 7, 8, 9, 10 people who next year would say yes, who could get you closer to that goal? And being able to distinguish between a marketing strategy that tries to get 8 to 10 people to say yes as different than getting 800,000 people to have a basic understanding it's a meaningful difference. I find it produces some relief. Ultimately, we probably want a mix of both. But unless the right people are getting the message at the right level of profundity, it's unlikely they're going to do something that will really help the organization move forward in a significant way. That's part of what I take from the conundrum that you're facing, that I think is a very common conundrum. Very common. We want to be as visible as possible, but amongst whom are we going to be directing the majority of our focus so that 3 or 6 months down the line they help us out?
Most certainly. And, you know, we definitely, as I stated, we're still kind of developing our strategic plan. As a result, we're also still developing that marketing plan. And so, yeah, we're trying to reach out to other individuals. And that's a long story. But thank you. I appreciate your comments. And that's reinforcing a lot of the things that I know that we have to do.
Jackie, really appreciated the presentation. It seems to me one of the great strengths you have is 27 years in existence. That's an amazing story in itself, but can you talk more about the accomplishments in those 27 years? You are at the crossroads of one of the most important issues we have in this community, right in the crosshairs of education and giving opportunities. What are the impacts over 27 years? That's a story I'd like to hear more about.
Certainly, and I would be more than happy to share that story, but I think the boss wants me off the stage as soon as possible. But yeah, we have a lot of great successes. And I'll run real quick. One of my biggest successes, one of the biggest successes I think that St. Louis Art Works has, one of our teaching artists Actually, in the summer, we had 2 teaching artists that were former apprentices of St. Louis Artworks. You know, so they left, they went, they received their degree, they're teaching in the classroom, and they're coming back to also mentor and teach the youth in St. Louis Artworks. That means the world to me because that tells me that they believe in the organization and they want to continue to push it forward as well. Thank you.
Miss Jackie, just want to say you do not have to prove yourself to me. I think you're an outstanding woman. But my question is, you said two poignant things. You said that St. Louis is cliquey. Where did you go to high school? By the way, I'd like to know that. And you also said that you knew coming into this position that you had to prove yourself. Do you think, do you think that plays a role in what you were talking about, connections and collaborations? That those 2 things you said, do you think they play an influence? That you came in and had to prove yourself, and maybe still do, not to me. And you said also that we in this community tend to be very cliquey. So do you think that that plays a role in when you talk about your institutional marketing or your fundraising or your programming collaborations?
Yes, certainly. I think it does, but also, don't get me wrong, I think that has played a role in every organization that I've been in. It played a role when I was in Mississippi. It played a role when I was in Chicago. It played a role when I was in Cincinnati. I think that, you know, and I'm not saying, I don't say it in terms of it being particularly a negative toward the community. But you really do. They want to see, are you going to be there? What are you going to do? Are you going to make connections? Are you going to make collaboration? Are you going to reach out? Are you going to be easy to work with? You know, are you going to be one of those more difficult people? So yeah, I kind of knew that going in, it's going to take a year and a half. And I even told the board from the beginning, it's going to take a while before we can start seeing some of these adjustments and seeing some of these changes. And to be honest with you all, this week right here, we've seen some major changes, and there are some things that if it happens, it's going to change the impact and our direction of St. Louis Artworks. So, thank you all.
Well, hello everyone. I'm Tom Ridgely. I'm the artistic director of the Shakespeare Festival, and I also just want to start by thanking Michael and Abby and Marie and everyone at DeVos and Rack and Vanessa and Mont for creating this opportunity. I think, like all of you, we've found it incredibly expanding and just sort of nourishing. That moment in March of 2020 was sort of one that stuck in my mind too as one of those last moments before everything shut down. So in a way, I think for us it was a great gift to have this experience overlap with the other experience that we all went through together. I don't know how we would have gotten through it, and I think a lot of the growth and learning that we did in the last 2 years was thanks to your mentorship and your guidance. So thanks everyone like that. It was actually hard to pick, I think, a challenge and a lesson that we learned because there were so many lessons and so many challenges. So we wanted to pick one that we thought was going to carry forward after COVID and after all of the pivoting and adjusting and sort of wild improvising that we were all doing. So we decided to pick a programmatic piece. And going down, which you can see it says a new tour, and it's a new tour because there was an old tour. Obviously, we're most known for the big Shakespeare in the Park production in Forest Park every year, but I've heard although I wasn't around, maybe Mon can confirm, that in actuality, the first thing the Shakespeare Festival ever did was a performance of its education tour, because early on, the education tour was a smaller scale production that sort of previewed the upcoming park show. So that first year, there were actually performances of the tour of Romeo and Juliet before the big one in Forest Park. So it's a legacy program. It's been a part of the festival's programming and identity from the beginning. And it was actually the program that we were in the middle of in March 2020 when everything shut down. We were about 2 weeks into the tour and obviously got canceled. And so we had to figure out, well, where do we go from here? The challenges that we faced will not be new to any of you. They're the challenges we all were facing. First and foremost, in the middle of it all, how could we do anything safely that would carry forward our missions? And we believed very, very strongly that even though in-person gatherings had stopped, even though live performance had all but shut down, that the mission had to carry forward in some way. So, and then obviously in the middle of all that, the George Floyd moment happened, and we all felt sort of, reflective and re-energized and really introspective about what the heck are we really doing when we talk about being an inclusive, welcoming, diverse arts organization. In particular, for us as a Shakespeare Festival, that's always been free and always prided itself on its accessibility. We're in Forest Park, anyone can come. There should be no obstacle to anyone enjoying the program we have. And yet, when we looked at our audience, we had to be honest with ourselves about who was coming. And we also had to acknowledge that we knew that even though it was free, and even though it was in Forest Park, which is very centrally located and very public and very high profile, that there were still barriers just to getting there or to feeling welcome there. And so how could we address those? Lastly, we were also facing the shifting corporate funding landscape here in St. Louis. Like a lot of you, we had been supported by Monsanto for a long time. They were the big supporters for this education tour because it went out to all sorts of areas across the state, often into rural areas, and we knew that that funding was going away too. So those are some of the challenges, and so it got us wondering, what if we, and let me preface this by saying, at this stage in our thinking, the sort of the virtual digital moment had kind of run its course a little bit for us. Like a lot of you, we threw a lot of things online. We were switching to virtual. We'd done that for a good chunk of time, and it just started to feel like the need, the appetite, and the benefit of that was starting to taper. So we thought, well, what if we took what we're best at, which is doing outdoor performances of Shakespeare in public parks, and took it beyond Forest Park, where we've always been. What if we took this, another thing that we're very good at, which is taking small-scale versions of Shakespeare around into different locations every single day, different cafeterias or gymnasiums or cafe gymnatoriums, all over the region, and tried to think of a program that could blend those two things together. The professionalism, the artistry of our Forest Park productions, and the mobility and the flexibility of our education tour. So in 2021, we launched a 24-park tour of a Shakespeare play. And it's another sort of best-kept secret about St. Louis, if you don't know. There are more beautiful, vibrant parks in this region than probably anywhere else on Earth. And I would include New York, Chicago, any place you want to think of. And then there are places that you wouldn't immediately leap to mind. In North St. Louis and East St. Louis, out in the county, there are just so many beautiful neighborhood parks that are real assets to their community and that are ripe for this kind of programming. So we scouted and identified and took a show to 24 different parks. And of course, lo and behold, the face of our audience started to change. We were in different communities. We were in rural communities. We were in urban communities. We were North County, South County, the East Side, as I said, and the makeup of our audience shifted really dramatically. And we thought, well, if we can't have a $50,000 Monsanto grant to pay for half our education tour every year, what if we approached smaller, more locally oriented businesses, corporations, even individuals, in the communities that we were going, and asking them to underwrite just a single performance at a much smaller, more maybe digestible amount. So we started soliciting $5,000 tour sponsorships for each of these spots. It worked. What worked about it? As I said, first of all, the school performances were wonderful, but they were very, they were private. They were just for those students and teachers. They weren't available to the general public. They weren't all ages. They weren't all audiences. So pretty instantly, we added, 50 new public performances in the last 2 years, this year and this past year. Also, the growth in the last 2 years has been tremendous. The amount of the number of pieces that were written about the tour doubled in the last year. Our audience almost doubled in the last 2 years. And we're building our family. We're collecting new email addresses. We're finding ways to build bridges for audiences from this program to our Forest Park program. We know people are sort of migrating from the tour to the other things that we do. And the biggest thing I want to say is that what people feel in these communities that we're going into feel a very different sense of ownership and pride over the fact that something is happening there. The story that sticks out in my mind is we went out to Collinsville last year, and the woman who ran the very small parks department at Collinsville just couldn't believe it. She kept saying, "You mean we get our own Shakespeare in the park?" Because the people in Collinsville love Collinsville, and they love their park, and they felt very not only happy that we were there, but proud that they were a place where things like this were happening. And we saw that everywhere we went. And that was it's a very different sense of ownership and relationship than in a forest park, where it feels like this is sort of for a much larger, more amorphous group. There's some wonderful testimonials that you can read. And shockingly, we were actually able to solicit and win more support for this program than we were previously. Both the number of supporters and the amount of support increased in this model over that previous model, which was obviously a much more common programmatic model. So the questions we're asking ourselves now is: we've sort of stumbled upon or sort of innovated our way towards this success? How can we build on it? There's some just very technical things that we know we can do to deliver a better product to the audiences. But we're also asking questions about, what's the right way to get this funded? There's some communities we may be going into where we don't want to extract resources, right? In Belleville, it's very easy to say, isn't there someone in Belleville who would like to pay for this performance? That's not true in every community, every neighborhood we go into. So where do we find the support for that, and finding the right kind of sponsors for each of those? We also know that in some of these communities, we have a lot of work to do just building relationship. They're newer to us, we're newer to them. We've made some first steps and some inroads, but it's not our traditional audience. We are not their traditional entertainment. And so how do we keep building on that? So that's our question for you, is as we sort of think about this, if you can help us sort of brainstorm around this, we think there's a lot of potential in this, and I'm telling you right now, we could easily go to 48 parks next year because there's that many places that would be wonderful to be. There's that many places that are asking us if we will come, but we're sort of constrained right now by this calendar. So there's that question: is do we find a way to increase the number of places that we're going, or do we find a way to serve more deeply or to enrich the programming that's happened there through partnerships, through collaborations? Is there a way to make not just this one performance happen in this park, but an evening or a day or a weekend, or even a sort of richer, engagement with those communities? Or something else, where, are there things that we aren't thinking of in terms of the potential for something like this? Because, we were finding over and over again that people were excited to have us, that it wasn't the kind of thing that they were used to, and that they seemed to want more of it, more of us, or more of things like it. So I think with that, I'll throw it to you guys and see if there are questions, ideas, suggestions. Yes?
I
questions, and I'm not really answering yours. Oh, sorry. I'm not answering your questions, but I just had, so when you started doing these tours, okay, did you use the full version that you were putting in Shakespeare in the Forest Park, or did you abridge it even further?
It was a bridge. This was a 90-minute, 6-actor performance.
Okay, and that brings me to my next question, which is, did you use the same group?
Different group.
Different group, and so
Yep.
you can run them at the same time in different places because you've got different tours?
In theory, we could. Yeah, it's a different company of actors.
That's pretty cool, because you're now spreading the opportunities for actors.
That was another big thing we wanted to do in the pandemic, was how can we keep serving our audience and how can we keep creating opportunities for artists? And so that's why we didn't want to just stop or just do online things. So
Great idea.
yeah, to answer your question, it could go either way.
Tom, it's Brett, way back here in the back. Nice work, great pandemic innovation, very exciting. 3 years from now, 5 years from now, you look back on this, what do you hope has been achieved? What's the goal of this? What's the outcome you seek from this investment?
I'd love to hit all there's like 120 parks in the St. Louis metro area. I'd like to hit all of them. And I'd love it if this could inspire all of us maybe to think less geographically about where we offer what we have to offer. I think one thing that, in St. Louis, to really sort of participate in what we might consider the best of the culture that's on offer, it's really in 2 or 3 neighborhoods. And so you've either got to get yourself there, or it's very hard to take advantage of it. So, and St. Louis being a place that is as sort of geographically or sort of psychologically kind of fragmented, this feels like it could be a way to start to just build bridges between different areas, different groups, different people.
The answer to that question seems to me to be the precedent to the answer to this slide. The way I think about that is this, and maybe this will be useful, maybe it won't be quite as useful, but this is what really strikes me about your presentation, and in particular the penultimate thing that you said in your presentation. When we're thinking about engagement, education, community, I think we run into fairly frequently 2 species of that work that are related but they're different. On the one hand, relatively light touch, short-term work, where we might be present in someone's life for a couple of hours. In the back of our head, we say, we hope we made a difference. We get good data. We reach lots of numbers. But a week later, 3 weeks later, 3 months later, 6 months later, 12 months later, we're not sure if there's any half-life of that experience left. We're not sure what the tail of that is, if there was any tail. We'd like to believe that we inspired somebody to come to the theater or join their local theater or, take a deeper interest, but we don't usually know because the engagement is short. Doesn't mean it's not worth it, it's just a very specific structural decision. On the other end, and this is where you were, I think, at the end of your presentation, you said, maybe not more parks, maybe not more activities, but maybe deeper in certain areas.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe both. But on the other end of the spectrum, long-term high-touch work that has a potential to change perspective or change behavior or increase confidence or affect some of these more developmental outcomes in the way in which people operate as humans or work with each other or talk with each other or think or behave or practice. And that typically would take more than an hour, right? So to me, that framework might help guide the discussion regarding 3 years on, after an enormous amount of effort and resource has been expended, what do we really want? And given that your focus is on engaging with people who do not typically engage with St. Louis Shakes, what do they want? Mm-hmm. That might be another way to get to this.
Yep.
What would be a valuable outcome for, let's say, 5 communities in which you feel you have, existing goodwill and perhaps interested, reliable partners with whom you could build a bi-directional relationship over a period of time. Not to say you couldn't do the additional parks, but it may be in addition to have those 5 more longitudinal experiences to complement the more short-term experiences that are offered elsewhere. Just a thought
I
might
love
help
it.
answer this question, that
Yeah.
framework.
It's a great way to think about it. Thank you.
Tom,
Yeah,
over here, Peter Palermo. I have lots of ideas for you, Tom.
We'll talk after.
And some of them are in total contradiction to what our esteemed Brett just said. So, but in a former life, I did outdoor park shows in California all summer long.
Wow.
Some of the most rewarding days of my life were spent in parks in California. We did all summer, up and down the state, all summer long, 5 days a week.
Wow.
We did a lot of work. And some of those parks were parks that nobody would ever dream of going to.
Yeah.
Parks where, we had to sweep for, needles and stuff before we set up the event. And those, and a big part of our day that we spent in those parks were workshops that we did for kids.
Wow.
And that was the most enriching. I loved performing. I love being on the stage, of course, but working directly with 7-year-olds every single day, in the Tenderloin of San Francisco or wherever we were, was really magical.
Wow.
And there's some performers that came out of there now that are Tony Award-winning, Emmy-nominated actors and performers who still talk about that experience as being formative. So I would tell you, go big, go all over, take it to places where nobody else is going.
That's awesome. Thanks, Peter.
I'm next, Tom.
Please.
First of all, I just want to take a moment in front of this room and say what an incredible job you have done since you have been here. You have done such innovative and expansive programming. And I really, because you haven't been here that long, so I want to say thank you. It probably feels like
Feels like a while, yeah.
I know, right? I want to do a yes and. To me, the yes and is deeper, but it's also proliferation. And I am not going to talk about money. That's your problem. So you have to figure out how to do that. I'm going to talk about an idea, okay? So after we see a production, a lot of times we all want to talk, right? We want to talk with our friends, process whatever. And people get excited if they have a chance to meet actors, right? So one of my ideas is, let's say that you go into a neighborhood and you've done the production. The next day, the cast comes back and there's a community picnic. And you do some playback. For those of you who don't know, it's a highly specialized form of improvisation where there's a teller and they share their feelings and experiences and the actors enact it. And it is a way for people often to process what they've seen and felt. Fannie Levy and I did it with her COVID stories last year. But there are workshops, Peter, that there's something about the breaking of bread. There's something about the return. It always hurts when we drop in and we fly out. It never feels good, especially when you see a child who is like looking, or a teenager, and they're excited and then they don't get more. Yeah. So what if they were to come back the next day and you hire the vendors who are in the community and they get paid for food and it's a whole thing, or the next weekend, and you process what everybody saw, you give other people a chance to express themselves, and then you're really building community, and then a little bit more, right? Maybe you also go on and do deeper work in a few communities, but I feel that the whole region needs this kind of work, not just maybe a few designated areas. So that is my 2 cents worth.
Thank you, Joan.
Yeah.
That's terrific. I think I probably need to cede the balance of my time unless, is there time for one more?
Just really quick.
Sure.
I homeschooled. I was part of a mom Shakespeare homeschool where we had 7-year-olds to 12-year-olds read
Shakespeare homeschool?
Uh-huh.
How did I know about this?
Where we had them read the Folger editions out loud. They read it out loud.
Is this St. Louis?
No, it was in California. So just talk to me afterward because we're out of time.
Okay, great. I will. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. It's been a huge help.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lisa Melandri. I'm the executive director at the Contemporary Art Museum, St. Louis, and we decided to take on, in some ways, rather an enormous challenge and discuss it with you today. So this is our mission, and I too, like you, Jacqueline, have a little bit of anxiety showing it now after our mornings. I hope this suffices for everyone. But our challenge was to revisit all of our institutional messaging. How do we talk about CAM? How do we include an explicit welcome and invitation? How do we share our values? And how do we describe ourselves as responsive to this moment? And this was really a 2-year moment. In 2020, museums and cultural institutions across the nation came together at the height of the country's racial reckoning to center diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion in our work. And at the same time, of course, COVID upended all aspects of our daily lives. The cultural center had to adapt and rethink the way we operate, the way we serve audiences, and even if, as we are at CAM, we were engaged with global art and artists, we had to be responsive to and invested in our local communities. So La Placa Cohen's, I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, 2020 Culture and Community in a Time of Crisis, a special edition of Culture Track, served as our guidebook. They posed a pretty profound question, which was, quote, "The leadership model for this moment is one based on empathy. How can a museum be a place to help, to understand, and to just make people feel better?" And so as we embarked on this challenge, that really informed and spurred our charge. And there were real reasons why we went into this. One is COVID. There was suddenly needs to communicate in real time with our audiences according to things like CDC guidelines. We needed to reallocate program resources to meet the needs of a remote environment and to let people know about it. And we also had to prove that we were a safe and trusted space for people to come into. 2, money. There were huge reductions in institutional funding, and as we all know sitting in this room, earned income. Funders canceled longstanding giving programs due to pandemic impact on profits. Some switched priorities to meet the growing public health need, and we knew that the same old case for support would no longer suffice to describe our need. 3, DEAI. Staff and board at CAM spent over 110 hours on a comprehensive mass action audit. It was an incredible institution-wide exercise that produced a comprehensive action plan. We wanted to make sure to integrate those values and actions in all messaging and collateral. 4, community. So we learned from Culture Track, but also just from our own observation, how essential it was for institutions to look local, to figure out how to be there for our communities. So we wanted to recommit to our 1-mile radius initiative and wanted to redefine our family accordingly. And finally, audiences. I mean, all bets are off in terms of audiences for all of us, but is there a way not to lose hope? Could we plan on growth through appealing to online audiences? Could we grow audiences whom we hadn't focused on pre-COVID? So we started first by getting very serious about this first question. What does CAM do that is unique and timely, and why do we matter? You remember these exercises from the beginning of this capacity building program for us were really pretty profound. We reviewed our mission, and we felt that it was correct for us, but there's this phrase in it about meaningful engagement, and so we wanted to lean into that and understand for whom, to whom. Then we, through audience mapping and a program strategy tree, we defined a program hierarchy by core audience and evaluation criteria. So we were able to identify priority audiences and the programs that serve them so that we could make new and better partnerships and then hopefully be strategic about how to fund them. And 4, we focused on 4 sort of background emphasized categories. What we do, our vision, and our impact, and all of this then inspired the way that we were going to talk about each other. And I'll read a few of them for you. I know this sounds a little boring, but it was really, really important in the way that we were able to define ourselves and who we were and then get the word out. So, what we do, we showcase the art of today for today's audiences. We reach broad and diverse audiences in St. Louis and beyond through free and engaging programming, and we inspire the next generation. Our vision is that St. Louis residents and visitors have access to extraordinary contemporary art and arts education. That today's artists are valued, supported, and provided opportunities. That St. Louis is a vital and thriving cultural center and destination for experiencing world-class art. Further, our impact can be felt through the fact that contemporary art is about the associations and ideas we discover by interacting with the work. It offers us moments for dialogue, connection, empathy, and shared humanity. Contemporary art is of the moment by the nature of its timeliness and encourages and provokes real conversations about the issues that we share. And finally, today's artists give voice to the diverse identities, values, and beliefs of our globally influenced society. CAM is as vibrant and ever-changing as the art we present. So that was really kind of the core. So, the outcomes. It was pretty wonderful what we had in terms of measurable success and positive response. First, we did it. We finalized our language. It was DEAI informed and community centered. And this took every single form you can imagine, all the stuff we all have. Our website language, our boilerplate, whatever you see on any kind of anything about us, and certainly on funding requests. And we segmented messages too. This was something we really learned through capacity building, making sure that we thought through what part of CAM's story was most interesting and appealing to whom. We got increased visibility. We got new media coverage outlets like Rolling Stone and Forbes, and we got more in-depth coverage from programs, from outlets who had covered us before. We also tooted our horn a bit more with more what I would call human stories, not just about the museum, our artists, and our programs, but about our people and our staff. And that was picked up in a really nice way to think about proliferating this messaging. And finally, through visibility, we got visibility through new and expanded community partnerships. We more deeply engaged with and talked about our new partners, which allowed for joint marketing and communications, which got the word out to new audiences. Finally, there was funding, and this was really thrilling. We had new funding, brand new funding for DEAI-focused and community programs like Collective Impact, our Outreach Partnerships, and CAM Connect, from sources like Phillips times AAMD, the Mid-America Arts Alliance, Robert and Tony Bader Foundation, and Caleres Cares. We received funding for new projects that really looked at how we could better understand who our audiences were and who they weren't, both for the implementation of a COVE survey and a comprehensive audience survey and evaluation project, both from IMLS. And we had received increased funding for ambitious exhibitions, notably from national sources like Andy Warhol Foundation, NEA Harpo, Henry Moore, and the Elizabeth Firestone Graham. So this was really, really wonderful. So I just want to show what the cycle looks like for CAM. And I think it's really helpful to see these successful outcomes in a different form, that if you have great art and you can figure out how to talk about it and distribute that message, that you indeed can increase your family and increase revenue. But I also really want to use this as a guide to our remaining challenges. One of the great things about working with the cycle is it really allows you to understand where you most need to make improvements. We believe that CAM produces, shepherds, and exhibits great art, so we didn't need to change the core of our programmatic activity, and that was a pretty wonderful place to start. As I mentioned, we thought we were doing okay with messaging, but we were messaging the same thing to all of our constituencies. And this exercise made it really clear that we had to refine not only what we were saying, but also how, where, and to whom we were saying it. We have a really good family, people who are deeply committed and engaged with CAM, and we were so delighted to have gained new local family, but our family needs to further grow in order to sustain the museum in the future. And revenue, as I expressed, we have been thrilled to add these new sources. Now we have to really focus on not only sustaining them, but sustaining giving from past sources as well. So our remaining challenges, and you'll forgive me because these are practical and existential, and I'm going to get really vulnerable with you all right now, just to give you, to put a few details or points on this. During this period, we increased audiences who came from our immediate and surrounding neighborhood, but our visitorship remains at 70% of what it was pre-COVID. Yes, we gained new funding, approximately $150,000 in total, but we've lost over $300,000 in funding from sources who have shifted their priorities. And success, this last bullet point, in a field that has lived and died by the numbers, how do we move forward with new evaluative criteria? How do we mark success? And specifically, what does that mean as we try to articulate that value in a new philanthropic landscape? And so that is our burning, burning question, and it's the one that I pass along to all of you, hoping that you may have some incredible insight. Thank you. Does anyone solve that one? Solve that one? Please solve that one.
Thank you, Lisa.
Yes, ma'am.
Lisa, could we scratch a little bit the surface of the translation of your visitor surveys, of your identifying what guests and visitors are looking for in the museum? How does that translate to the actions that you've taken? I'm curious to understand a little bit more of how that articulates.
A great deal of our survey is yet to come because we have only really embarked on our Coves survey, which is the first part of this, recently at the opening of this most recent season. But what we were finding out in some of our more kind of collaborative, smaller programs were very small, practical, and wonderful things about when programs should be held, where they should be held, how often we should be doing things at the museum versus at the community center where our program partners were. The other thing that I think has been really, really interesting is that we shifted some programs. There is a program called Collective Impact, and there is an arts component, which is kind of the apotheosis of this program. And the program participants chose the artist and the artwork and the way that it was going to work. So I also think some of this is really about if you want to have these deeper kind of partnerships with audiences, then you have to listen to them about how they want to do it and really be prepared to support that process. So those are the things that we learned. Some of them very, very practical, but really helpful for us to understand.
Thank you.
Measures of success. Evaluative criteria.
I enjoyed your remarks very much. Could you say a word about redefining success? I think that is a big deal. I assume you would think of success like how many dollars and how many people walk through the door. Could you talk a little bit about what some other ways to measure success?
I think the reason this is the biggest question, and I think this is the biggest question for the entirety of the field, is even more than the money. I think we have really, truly defined what is a successful program by how many people see it or come to it. It has totally and completely been about audiences. So we know we have to be able to shift in this deficit position for audiences to something that is far more qualitative than quantitative. My question, and what I don't have the answer to, is what is that? Is that an impact story? Is it that if X number of your audience is impacted or has positive engagement, how can we capture that in a way that will allow us, and I think every single one of us also has had the experience of, you get different kinds of grants if you can prove different kinds of audience numbers, right? The kind of per audience member expenditure. So we've got to get to the qualitative but I am not clear, and I think we are still sort of reeling as a field in the arts and culture sector about exactly how we can define that in common understood terms. And that's, the golden goose.
Lisa, I'd throw back at you, you mentioned COVES. COVES is quantitative, and then you're mentioning qualitative. I envision like a connection to, focus groups, to really centering on what is our audience saying, and they're defining your success measures, right? So it's about that participatory process that you're incorporating into your programming, and then bringing it back, just like you're mentioning, right? Like a community-led curating process where community is participating in the product. I think that this is the same thing. And I think we also have a tendency, I'll give an example. What is it, from the 90s, visual thinking strategies, Philip Yenewine's process out of Project Zero. In the visual arts, we're all familiar with this, but we all gave up on it because it took away our voice, right? If you're an art historian and you work in a museum, you don't want your public to tell you what they know about the Van Gogh. You want to tell them what you know about that piece. And so we end up sort of tending to eliminate the voice of the public instead of embracing that uncomfortable nature of it.
Well, I do want to say, I think the one thing that is important about something like COVES is I think it's really good to start from the hard data, because I think that's where we can find what's missing. And missing could be a particular group or population, but it could also be a number or a geography. So I do think, I'm spilling. So I do think that that's a good place to start, but I think we all then have to move into exactly what you're talking about, which is the focus groups, different kinds of conversations. And just as an aside, I will tell you, all our educators do VTS still. Now, they take it and they do with it what, how, when they want, but it is a way to make sure that there is some audience-centered discussion on the works of art that we are showing, and because we wish to be audience-centered, we feel it's really important.
Hey, Lisa.
Hi.
So just, this may not answer the ultimate question. I think it ties back to everything, but ultimately I think we're all wrestling with that measurement question and the impact and the qualitative, how do you quantify that? I think the point I would want to make and to leave with is go back to the mission, right? And then do the deeper analysis of why. Why is that mission important? And it's the answer to that question that is what you measure. And figuring out what that is, and that probably changes for everybody. But understand the why underneath.
Lisa?
Hi.
Hey, thanks for a great presentation and your vulnerability, because I think that's so important that everybody recognizes.
I have to tell you our failures.
Well, it's the yin and the yang, but first of all, I wouldn't give up. We're just feeling post-COVID. So 70%, maybe that's not a terrible number, and maybe it will grow, and we shouldn't give up on the notion that things will continue to return. I just think that's important. But two things I would point to for thinking about how you define success. First of all is next generation, which I know Cam is, again, at the heart of. But that is the future of the arts, and so the success you have in enticing the next generation to care about what you do and care about the arts, I think is an important measure of success. And the other thing I would encourage is collaborative success. How do you work with your partners in the arts to together achieve success? Because everybody's dealing with the same thing. If we increase audience, if we increase interest, it's a win for everybody. And I would look for ways to both do that activity and measure success in that way.
Thank you. Am I done? Thank you.
Where's Vanessa? Is Vanessa here? Is Vanessa in the room? She's coming back. Okay, I'll wait to thank Vanessa then until she gets back. I'd like to thank Marie and Abby from our team, who are the glue. We wouldn't do any of this without them. It's good to see all of you. Seriously, we had the opportunity to do a number of programs during the. Is there an echo here? Can you hear me okay? It's a little weird up here. Are we okay, AV? Am I okay? All right.
We had an opportunity to do a number of these programs, but none of them started and finished essentially during the course of the pandemic. So this has been a sort of trial for us as well. I'm not complaining about it, but I would just say it's really good to see you in human form, and we appreciate you. And the work that you've done in the last 2 years has been an inspiration to us, truly, sincerely. This is enormously difficult work. It can be very lonely work. And it's wonderful to be able to gather here. Sorry, I'm getting super distracted by the audio. I'm getting a big echo back here. Do I sound echoey up there? Maybe it's this microphone? It's not on? It is echoey though, isn't it? I'm just going to turn this off, unless we're recording and we need the AV.
I can leave it on. I'll just mute you in the house, but keep the recording going.
Okay. So you're muting. I will use my. I was a trained Shakespearean actor, so I will use my Alexander technique. How's that? My Shakes people. Okay. Keep it on. Is this okay? Can you hear me? It's on. I haven't touched anything. Okay, great. All right. So anyway, I was just trying to have an authentic moment and say it's great to see you. That flopped. One more piece of content for you, and then I'm not going to use it, and then a closing thought, and I welcome comments and questions throughout. You know, we've gone through a lot in this program. Michael went through one form of strategic planning earlier today. It's a good fit for a lot of folks. It's a heavy lift for others. It's a heavy lift in general to do that type of process. I believe in it. We do 80 or 90 of them a year. It's a great thing to do. But there's one other tool I'd like to provide for you as you leave this program that takes everything that we've discussed in the last 2 years and it puts it onto one piece of paper and says, we're all busy people. We all lead several lives simultaneously. We've got a lot going on. What are we taking from this to implement moving forward? In summary. Okay, so it's sort of a palate cleanser from the program. What are the key top headlines we want to take with us moving forward? And there is a handout in your packet. You needn't refer to it right now. In fact, I would almost prefer that you don't, because then you'll know all of the things I'm going to say in advance. It'll be very disappointing and boring. And I'd like to have this dialogue with you, but just know that there is a handout in the package that speaks to everything that we're going to discuss here. And I will say that I developed this tool 6, 7, 8 years ago after having gone through a dozen of these programs and realizing that, you know, at the end of the program, what I would really hope would have happened is that if any of the things that we were talking about made sense, that it becomes more a way of thinking and operating than it becomes a set of documents that one follows. I mean, the documents are really helpful, but the mentality, the executive mentality or the executive mentality in partnership with board is what I hope will linger and will really continue to contribute to a sense of ease or increased ease, if not absolute ease, and peace and joy and productivity in this work. So there are 6 things that I think we could say in sum. We would hope that that stay with you and that would form a framework for thinking at moments that are tough or moments where you get a vacation, you say, okay, I finally have the time to do this, or when you're bringing on a new senior team member and you need to be able to say, this is where we're going, or you are working with a new board chair and you're saying, this is where I think we're going and these are the things we're going to focus on. I'd like to think that you'd be able to use a version of what I'm going to talk about. The place that I start is the programmatic highlights. When we talked earlier in the program, some of you may recall, I tried to walk you through this very complicated diagram. It helps me think about the allocation of program in a season. A level, the big stuff. It's tough to pull off. Takes a couple years to plan. Takes more money than we have today. May take more people than we have today. Often requires partnership, often requires more fundraising. Cannot be done if we plan it 6 months in advance. The big stuff, okay? I call it A-level programming. It's the stuff that's out there on that 24, 36-month horizon. We don't need 15 of them. We need 2 or 3. Catnip for board members. That's the big stuff, okay. That's the stuff that I'm going to invite my friends and colleagues to. Okay, we stand a chance of getting in the press around that. Okay, yeah, I can get people to drive 45 minutes for that. I love our quieter stuff. I love our B-level programming that we program on an annual basis. But if we're honest with ourselves, a lot of it looks the same from year to year. It's a small variation. It's our workshops, our classes. It's the good stuff that happens every day, a little bit more sotto voce, more quiet work. Hard to get somebody to come make a journey to an organization to see this if this is the thing that we're dangling in front of them. Not that it's not good, it's just not spectacular or sensational or press-worthy. The balance between A and B is going to be different for different organizations. But A-level work is what typically is what gets new donors to pay attention, new audiences to pay attention. Sometimes it boils down to scale. Sometimes it just boils down to being able to do something bigger than we do in an ordinary course of business. That's why it takes longer to plan it. Then C-level work, often planned at the last minute, 6 months in advance, 6 weeks in advance. I also call this burning bush programming. The artistic director is out for her Sunday afternoon run, and she sees the burning bush, and she says, on Monday morning, put down your pencils, folks. Come hell or high water, we're going to pull this off in the next 3 weeks. Move everything else off to the side. Boy, is it exciting to be around when we see a burning bush. But if we run our business like this and 80% of our programming is planned on a 6-month horizon or a 6-week horizon, C starts to stand for chaos, right? All of that to say that I'm thinking about my major program areas. I'm just going to call it A, B, C, D. If I'm a theater company, this is my main stage work, my studio theater work, my education work, my community work. If I'm a children's chorus, this is my choral programs, this is my touring, this is my recording. If I'm a museum, this is my permanent exhibition, my temporary exhibition. You understand. The major categories of work. And as an executive, I'm saying, what am I going to focus on in each of these areas over the course of the next year? Not that I don't love all my program children. I do. Every program is created equal. However, there are some that stand a chance of getting people to really pay attention. We know this. There's some that stand a chance of getting more people to attend. Unfortunately, at this moment in the history of our sector, everybody is saying that the only stuff that's getting here is stuff that already has a natural audience for the most part, the big blockbuster stuff. I'm not saying I like this. I'm not saying I hope that that stays this way. But it's really, really hard right now to get new people to come to our theaters and museums for the quieter stuff. So right now, as executives, in my mind, it's September. We're thinking about September through next August, for those of you who function on that season. And we're saying, okay, I know I can't ask my team to operate at fever pitch, above business as usual energy, for everything that we do. So I'm going to focus us. And I'm going to focus my board on 1 or 2 big programmatic highlights in each of my program areas. That's the first thing that as an executive, I think we take away from this program, is being able to discern between, realistically, the stuff where if we put a lot of muscle and we get our board organized and we get our fundraising organized, we're able to make progress, real progress, new audiences, new donors, press attention, institutional marketing glitter, break through the clutter. It's not everything that we do. We have to be honest with ourselves. We have to select. That's project 1. Decision 2, project 2 is, what is the institutional marketing plan that sits on top of those programmatic highlights. How am I going to tell the story of our 25th anniversary retrospective in the months that lead up to our 25th anniversary retrospective? What am I going to do with the alumni? What am I going to do with the artists? How am I going to tell the story of our impact? How am I going to produce thought leadership? How am I going to stir up a little bit of debate or controversy? What parties am I going to throw? What celebrities am I going to try to attract? What is my institutional marketing plan to get people to pay attention to that moment? Because I can't pay my way into their consciousness. I have to kick up some dust through my institutional marketing. So this is the second job. This is the second high-level job. How am I going to create noise around my A-level moments? This isn't to say my programmatic marketing effort, my butts and seats, my daily social media and e-communications and website, I'm going to keep up with all that. Fine, yes. But if we're honest with ourselves, a lot of that's going to get ignored. It's not going to break through. It's not going to reach new people. How are we going to reach new people? How are we going to excite a key set of people who I have come to think of as game changers? I'll come back to that in a minute. Major donor prospects, foundation officers, corporate folks, members of the press, where if they write about us a week before the exhibition opens, it means something completely different than if they write about us 2 weeks or 3 weeks into the exhibition. Key strategic partners who can increase the visibility or decrease the cost of what we are doing. One of the great donors to an organization that I ran 10 years ago, 12 years ago, was someone who did not contribute $1. They didn't contribute $1. They provided physical therapy for 20 modern dancers that decreased our bills by $75,000 a year. No money changed hands. That's a game changer. How are we getting there? We're thinking about the board and staff members who are going to execute. Who is going to own these projects? What board members are we going to try to get attached to which A-level moments? We've got 4 of them. We've got 4 big moments coming up this year. Which board members out of my 20, I don't need all of them, I need 6 or 7, maybe 8. I could live with 4. If I had 4 board members who were really on fire and were absorbing and serving as an ambassador for one of these projects each, I'm going to be busy. If I have 8, I'm going to be really busy. I don't need 20. We have to disabuse ourselves of that mythology that we can ever engage our full board. It's not going to happen. If anyone has engaged their full board, congratulations, you're in the 1% minority. The rest of us are going to be very happy if we really engage 4 or 5 of our members. We have 4 or 5 members who really say, Brett, yeah, I'm going to work with you on trying to raise 50 grand to fill the gap on this program. Or Brett, yeah, I'm going to work with you to try to find a university partner for that touring exhibition. Or yeah, Brett, I'm going to work with you to try to find a major cultural nonprofit in town to partner with our midsize or small cultural nonprofit so that we can politely, in the long run, poach some of their donors by fusing our families together. I just happen to be on their board. We're going to do something together. If you have 4 or 5 board members who are on fire like this, most of us will feel like our plate is full. We do not need to engage our full board. Not really tweetable, but real. Real. Okay? Which board members am I going to try to get attached to which of these projects? Now, we talked about project-based engagement of board members. Project-based engagement of board members. We're asking board members to serve as an ambassador to adopt a project. And we're trying to say to them, I don't need you to memorize the whole organization. I don't need you to come to 26 things this year. I don't need you to understand everything that we do. I need you to help me find 2 donors for this project in 9 months. I need you to help me find one university professor where if they say, let's go to Timon of Athens next year, 643 Shakespeare students will buy tickets to Timon of Athens. It's always helpful to have Shakespeare professors in our back pocket to help market our less popular Shakespeare shows. If we have board members attached to specific asks, a couple of things happen. Other board members see those board members being successful, and maybe we can convert them into more productive members of the team moving forward. We usually get those board members to be more joyful. They feel connected to something that is spiritually and intellectually interesting to them, more interesting than looking at our profit and loss statement. It helps them think about their Rolodex in a different way. Okay, they're not just asking me to raise money, they're asking me to activate my political network, my social network, not to bring in money all the time, maybe to bring in alliances, maybe to bring in partnerships. When we're thinking about building boards of diverse abilities, and we're saying we want to honor all of the types of assets that different people can bring into the conversation, we have to be a bit more flexible and a bit more specific when it comes to what we're asking of board members. So structurally, the board project is, can you help us find partners who increase the visibility or decrease the cost of doing our project? That can be a media partner, it can be a larger institution with whom we partner to increase the visibility of the project, and in the end, hopefully we are able to peel off a half dozen or a dozen or a couple dozen of their supporters. We're not stealing them, we're just introducing them to a new organization in town. Partnership is a big one. Can we look for partners who can help us print our publication rather than us paying to print it? There are many different types of partnerships that can increase visibility, decrease the cost of the project. Think of it as in-kind contribution. That's where the brain of the executive is, going to the board member. The second is key influencers, famous people, people who influence other people, city council people, clergy, priests, cantors, imams, worked with all of them, union leaders, leaders of community organizations, of CRAs and BIDs, leaders of chambers of commerce, university professors, people in the press. Executive directors say to their board members, I need a synagogue, or I need a union, or I believe if we can reach the people who that union has a tendency to influence, they will come, but they're not going to listen to me. They're not going to listen to a postcard. They're not going to listen to a tweet. They're going to listen to somebody who they already trust. Key influencers who can increase the visibility of the project. That's number 2. No money changes hands. It's a good job for a board member. Third is money. Third is help me fundraise. Third is help me fundraise. And in respect to helping me fundraise, here we come to prospects. And staff has some for each project, and we're asking board members to find 2 or 3. We don't need 20. We don't need 20. We need board members to bring us 2 people a year, 1 person a year, 2 people a year to make a big difference. Think about it. If we have 4 or 5 board members who bring us 2 or 3 serious people a year, most of us would feel like we were making significant progress. We don't need our whole board engaged. We don't. We're not going to get it, most likely. If we have 4 or 5 people who are engaged, if we put our focus there and we really work on that, and they work with us, and they bring 2 people, 1 key influencer, 1 strategic partner, 2 donors, 1 foundation person, 1 corporate person, it's going to make a big difference. Most organizations in this room have budgets under $2 million. Many have budgets under $1 million. A few have budgets under $500,000. We do not need 100 new donors to make a difference. 6, 7, 10 significant yeses, 6, 7, 8, 9 significant yeses can shift the tide for many organizations in this room. So as executives, we're saying, okay, we've got our 4 major highlights. We know we're going to need 7, 10, 15 yeses this year. That's going to add up to X thousand. Some of it's going to be individual donors. Some of it's going to be maybe a foundation, maybe a small business. Maybe it's a partnership that decreases cost. No cash changes hands, but we don't have to spend as much money. Executives, this is part of the job. What is the prospect list? Not out there for everything. Okay, out there for everything, fine. That's the end of year annual appeal. We send the email, we send the letter. We do Giving Tuesday, fine. That's everybody on the email list. Who are the game changers? Who are the people who have the ability to change the future of the organization? Who are they? What are their names? Who's going after them? What project are we getting them attached to? That list, for many of us, is going to be 30 people. We need to convert 10 people. I'd love to have a list of 30 people. Conversion ratio of 1/3. We do not need a list of 80 people. We do not need a list of 60 people. We need a list of 30 people. And we need a board, or at least a subset of the board, that's really rigorously focused on those 30 people, like the biggies in town, like the universities would be, like the hospitals would be. Many of you in this room have been courted at one time or another by a university or a hospital, by these big, huge development teams. If you have money to give and they know that, they get to know you on a personal level, significantly. It's a high level of customer service. It's a high level of segmentation. Why do big money people give big money to big institutions? In many cases, because there is a level of vigorousness and a level of seriousness and a level of segmentation and personalization that frankly just far outstrips the capacity of small development teams to pay attention to human beings who at the end of the day like to be seen as a human and not as a patron number. And so we have a tendency in our field to get polite go-away gifts. Go-away gifts. I got all 3 emails. I got the 2 letters. I got the half-hearted phone call from one of your staff members. I'm so glad you're here. I hope you continue to serve the community in this way. I know you know that I can make a $50,000 gift. Here's $500. Now please go away until you get to know me better. If we have a list of 400 people or 4,000 people and we call that our cultivation list, we're going to get a lot of go-away gifts. Not because our work is not excellent, not because we don't deserve more, not because we're not the salt of a community, but because our ability to do the work in relationship to those fairly few people pales in comparison to the ability of the larger organizations. And we have to face that. It's an uncomfortable truth, but it is a truth, that we have a tendency to spread ourselves far too thin across way too many people, and we see the results. Most of us in this room need 7 or 10 or 15 yeses a year. That's this list. That's this list. That's this list. So who are these people who are trying to get engaged with these projects? What is the best fit for their interest and type? Then finally, we focused on fundraising mechanisms, a very dry word, the very dry word for converting interest into money, visibility into money. And there were 3. There was the annual campaign, AKA in many cases a membership. One size fits all, always there. Any given Tuesday, you can go on the website, you can become a donor at $500, you know what you get in return. Annual campaign, fairly anonymous, hopefully hundreds of people. Special events, quid pro quo style of fundraising for most of us. Probably not a huge profit margin for most of us. A lot of work for most of us. Not a lot of payoff for most of us. Good debate about whether or not it's a good use of our time. I like to argue that if we have new people coming who are seeing us at our best and we break even or we do better than break even, see it as much as a cultivation event, as a fundraising event. The biggest lesson I learned at the Kennedy Center, and there were a lot, but there are only a few that translate to the outside world. The development team was always busier in the 2 weeks after the biggest fundraiser of the year than they were the 2 weeks before. What they were doing is they were taking the full list of the people who came to the gala and they were looking for the game changers and they were following up with them and pitching them on what we have called a targeted campaign. A targeted campaign. Money for a specific project. Money for a specific project. I need 10 people at $5,000 each to fill in my $50,000 gap. I need 10 people at $1,000 each to fill in my $10,000 gap. I need 5 sponsors at $25,000 each to fill in my $125,000 gap. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has a specific benefits program. People feel rewarded because they have given to something that they are passionate about. How do we convert the goodwill into money? What is the product? What is the product that people can buy? Is it clear? Is it sweet? Is it attractive? Does it provide good return on investment, psychologically or practically? Are we honest with ourselves about how sweet that donor relationship is inside of our organization? Have we mastered the 3 mechanisms? Each of these moments, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, we're saying to ourselves, okay, for these 2, we're going to drive targeted campaigns around this one. This one's going to be tied to our gala, and this one we're going to try to just get people and pull them into our annual campaign. We're going to do it right at the end of the year. We're going to send out the letter. We're going to focus especially on some of these people and ask them to provide general operating support for the next year. How are we going to shake people loose from their money once they have felt the fire of the A-level program? What is the conversion? How do we close the deal? Who closes the deal? When? At what number? With 30 people. Not when are we going to send out our annual letter? Is it going to be before Thanksgiving or after Thanksgiving? Spray and pray. Hope we get as much return as possible. Last year we got 4%. If we can get 5% to return it this year, that's a success. That's good too. But this is where the real money comes in. This is where the growth comes in. This is where the 7 to 10 yeses a year that leads to that next 50 to 60,000 that allows us to hire the grant writer or allows us to hire the executive assistant so that we can spend less time behind the desk and more time cultivating these people. It's incremental. It doesn't happen overnight. But the story of success, so far as I've experienced in small and mid-sized cultural institutions, is incremental wins in batches of 7 to 10 a year. And you may have had different experience, and I think there are anomalies out there and other experiences out there, but this is critical. How do we convert that goodwill into money? And then the last thing is, what's on the horizon? What's the one longer-term thing that when we get these people close to the fire, when these prospects come and see this stuff, if they didn't donate it to already, maybe we're just trying to engage them through this. What is the thing, not 6 months later, not 9 months later, 6 weeks later, that we can start talking about, which is the evolution of that product line next year, the evolution of that program next year. What is the next big thing? What's the next exciting thing? What's the next A-level concept? What's the next evolution of the cycle? What are the 4 or 5 things we're going to focus on? How are we going to tell our story? Which board members, subset of the board, are we going to try to activate? Who are the game changers we're trying to get in? How are we going to convert them? How are we going to get them to come back next year? In my view, everything we've talked about can be boiled down to these steps. Of course, there's a lot of nuance. But I'll tell you, in addition to standing on stages like this and bloviating, I do also run cultural organizations as interim executive often. I'm running 2 nonprofits right now. I'm tired. One is a great school for the arts, a big school for the arts in New York City. The other is a significant modern dance company in New York City. Okay? I'm here in this space with you often enough to be able to take theory and put it into practice. This is literally what we do in the first 2 weeks of entering into an interim assignment. Literally. And it's enough. It carries us through. It's enough for the board. It's enough for the staff to be able to see the forest through the trees. I know life is complicated. I'm not trying to pretend it's not. But if we can get to this level of coherent, consistent, strategic approach to the big issues that we face, I find it contributes to something which I'll spend the last 10 minutes here talking about once I've taken any questions, comments, ideas, lingering doubts or concerns. Yes?
One question.
Sure, Joe.
Thank you. All right, is it on?
Yeah, you're good, Joe.
Okay. In looking at the concept that we're asking a small number of board members to identify, say, 2 people within their networks to help us to build and to grow. you've got that list, and you've got that game changers list, which is kind of feeding the
There's
broader
crossover
prospect.
between those two.
So what happens when the crossover is not very high? How do you prioritize who you're really pursuing in a meaningful way? If you can reach 30 and your board gives you 15 and you already had 30 on your list and there's overlap of 4, obviously you focus on
Yeah.
those 4.
Yeah.
But then do you lean into where the relationships are from your board?
So Joe, the technical answer to this is, do you remember when we were talking about fundraising, we were talking about A, B, C, and D? Does that mean anything to you? I'll just go through it quickly. A-level prospects are people, in my mind, immediate priority. They've had a recent positive experience with the organization. They came to a show, they came to the museum, they saw the kids, they're glowing, okay? That's first priority. That's conversion within the next 3 months, within the next quarter. B level is, have stated strong interest, have not had a recent positive experience, okay? I gotta get them to something, second priority, okay? I'm not gonna solicit them before they've come and felt the fire. I'll get a go-away gift. I want a transformative gift. I don't want a polite go-away gift. C level, haven't been recently, we don't know if they're interested in us, but we have a connection. Oftentimes, that's a board member contact. Not always, but oftentimes. As an executive, you have to look out for that. I've got a buddy who I think should be involved. Have they come to anything? No. How much level of interest do they have in us? I'm not sure. C level, it's okay, we need C levels, but we need to move C level to B level before we can get them to A. Okay, this is a very technical response, but it helps me as an executive say, where do I put my energy? Make sure and close with the A's before you're worrying about the C's, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
That does. And the counter to that, or the
Yeah.
other side of that is, if we're building out our communications plan for our game changers list, make sure that as soon as they move from being a C to a B or to an A, that we're operating on them properly.
Yes.
But that we're not giving the same message to
Yes.
the game changers that have stopped being Cs.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
if you can. See, that's the whole thing, Joe, about the game changer concept. If you're, how many staff members do you have, Joe?
12 to 15.
Okay, 12 to 15. So you're mid-size in this room. There's lots of folks that have 1 or 2. There's a few that have 30 or 40, okay? How many people do you have focused on fundraising?
2.5.
Okay. So you have more you have double the capacity of most people in this room, which is good, okay? So my expectations for you would probably be a bit higher. In my mind, if you have 2 people focusing full-time on fundraising, as an executive, I would be saying, I think they should be able to do what I'm talking about here with a portfolio of between 40 and 60 people a year. Do it well. So in my mind, your game changer list would probably be in the 120 to 150 range, purely based on the capacity of your people. You've got full-time people focusing on this. I would want full-time people, if they're focused on major donors, have a portfolio between 40 and 60. In my mind, that means they're trying to close on 15 people a quarter, or they're moving me to close on 15 people a quarter. That's how I would think about that. So, and if I am the executive director, and I'm the chief fundraiser, and the chief marketer, and I'm the chief board person, and there's some folks in this room like that, my list is probably going to be 20 people, 15, 20 people. But it has to be 15 or 20 people. It has to be. We have to make time for that, because if we don't, there are a few tricks to finding more money, but none of them are sustainable. Yes, Jackie, we got a microphone here.
I'm sorry, I just want to make sure I just heard you correctly. You said if you're the executive director and you don't have a development person and blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah, 15 to 20 a year?
Yeah, I'm talking about building real, intentional, strategic relationships. What's the next thing I'm going to invite this person to? I'm not going to keep them on my general email list. I'm going to pull them out of that list. I'm going to communicate with them as a person every year. Because I have done some research. They have given $5,000 to the organization down the street, or $1,000, or they're the program officer, and I know I got to some way, come hell or high water, make my way into their life. So I'm going to really try to develop a relationship with them. 15 to 20 people that might yield 5 to 7 yeses that'll help move the needle, in my mind, would be a good goal. And hopefully there would be a few board members who would be willing to take on 1 or 2 or 3 of those. But with a $600,000 budget, 5% growth, $30,000, would be enough to hire that next part-time person, or hire the grant writer, Do you do your grants as well? Are you
No,
the
we
grant
have a
writer?
part-time grant writer.
Yeah, good. That's good. Yeah, that's the first place I go because executives can't spend 20 hours a week writing. But you have an executive assistant?
No.
Okay, so Jackie, the way that I think about this, I don't mean to go down a rabbit hole, but the way I think about this is, what's the person that I can hire so that I can be more productive as a fundraiser? You're not going to go out and hire a director of development for $30,000, but you could go out and hire somebody that enables you to be a more assertive director of development 20 hours a week. They're only going to want to talk to you anyway. That's how I sort of think about it. 15, 20, convert 1/3 of them, 5 to 7 yeses. If a few of those are 4-figure, if one of them's 5-figure, that's your 30 grand. Maybe try to do it again the next year with a little bit more capacity. 3 years from now, that's where we got to have our head. We've got another 20 to 25 people in at $1,000 to $5,000 a year, helping to feed that annual support. We're building our capacity. We're leveraging those people so that we can go out and raise more money. It's easy to talk about it like it's a textbook. I know it's got to be done. It's not easy. It's not a textbook. But having beat my head against the wall of capacity for 15 years, I look at the small and mid-sized organizations that make the progress. It's made in batches of 5.
No, that's very reasonable. That's
Yeah.
that's much less than I was anticipating.
Yeah. I know Vanessa. Hi, Vanessa. Nice to meet you after these last 20 years. I know we're going to hand the stage over to you here in a minute, okay? Before I do, I want to thank you and I want to thank RAC. This has been a really. It's so commonplace and expected to thank a funding agency. And so we do it, but we also mean it authentically. It took courage to do this program. You didn't know us very well. You gave us a lot of trust and a lot of confidence. We hope that we proved to you that we took that seriously and that we earned that trust. And we feel very humbled to have been part of your community for these last 2 years. And we know because your colleagues tell us, but we also know because the field recognizes RAC as a real leader, and it's making a big difference. And specifically at moments like this in our sector, I believe that citywide leadership, that regional leadership is more critical than ever. We got to stick together. So thank you for the honor of this, and thank you, RAC, for this. The last thing that I wanted to say, and then I'll hand this over to you, Vanessa, is for the last year, I've mentioned to you I've been serving as interim president, and I've had the opportunity to do that for about a dozen organizations over the course of the last 10 years. And I lost my hair in this business, doing it for too many organizations full-time before that. There's something that I've come to recognize that I think is the prize as managers. And the prize I've come to feel is to be able to create a culture of calm within our organizations. Calm, not lethargy, but focused calm. The signature of focused calm is an organization that is aligned around a plan of some kind. Everybody knows where we're going. They know a mission. They feel bound to that mission. They feel psychically gratified by that mission. That mission is central. It's not just an inert document. It is felt. They have a leader who reminds them that they are making achievement against that mission with some regularity. There is a process of affirmation where teams feel that they are aligned around an important goal, a community servant goal, a meaningful, long-term, meaning of life goal, and that they are making progress around that. And they are led in some way along the lines of that A-level thinking so that they can see a year from now, 18 months, 2 years from now. I don't know all the details. I don't know exactly how it's going to be pulled off. I might be a little bit scared about it, but boy, I want to be around for that. I want to be around for that. And there's a culture of planning within the organization that's not burdensome or onerous or bureaucratic, but it is comforting. Because there's somebody at the helm who is saying, we're going to get together and we're going to talk about this in some detail way before we need to execute on it. And there is a commitment at the level of leadership to not getting everything right all the time, but getting out in front of enough things that the culture of the organization evolves to expect that we will have enough time to do the really important things, and that we are going to get sideswiped from time to time, but we will be able to sustain it because we are resilient people and we have enough planned far enough in advance that we can take it. Very different than a C-level organization that operates in a state of short-term planning all the time, where executives are issuing short-term demands, even in a polite way, that make people feel like they can never catch their breath. It's an organization that is building and has some confidence it can build by 5 or 7 or 10, or in the case of your Joe, 40 or 50 perhaps conversions a year, but they see a path towards that. This is a staff that's willing to work longer hours on occasion because they know that their employer will protect them. They've had discussions about how we're going to take care of you as a person, in addition to asking above business as usual pretty often because we are aligned around that higher goal. It's an organization that feels that its essential policies and infrastructure is in place. We have taken care of the boring stuff so that we can focus on the higher level stuff. And right now there's so much changing, and there are a lot of boring policies that probably need to be revisited and refreshed so that people feel safe. Not always without a level of useful anxiety, but they feel fundamentally safe, fundamentally like I am part of something where there is a plan, and we have a culture of planning. And while I don't feel relaxed, I do feel supported. I feel like I can do my work. And this is what I have begun to think of as an art of management, in addition to the technical craft of management. How can we increase the level of productive calm in our business? I hope that a lot of what we have discussed in this program provides some additional tools to contribute to calm. It's not always readily achievable. There are things that surprise us. There are crises that emerge. We get smacked in the side by pandemics and by major crises. But there are things that are under our control that we can take steps against to help produce a sense that people have a platform on which to do their best work. And my hope is that in addition to all of the technique, perhaps a sense of this has been more fully supported within the life of your organizations. And that you don't end up with a haircut like mine. It's been a real pleasure to work with all of you. And Vanessa, I think you wanted to say something before we wrapped up today, and I'll be around for a little bit after this. But please know our door is always open. We consider you family. We really do. I'm not going to assume that you consider us family, but our door is always open to you. Email, call, anytime. Add us to your email list. We'd love to keep up to date. And anytime we're coming through, we'll be in touch. Anytime anybody comes to Asheville, North Carolina, if you do, give me a ring. Happy to show you around. Would love to see you for a beer or a coffee or a walk, okay? All right, thanks everybody. Thank you very much.
Well, they say time flies when you're having fun. Look at this, it is already 2:30. I've got 4 things, and one will require audience participation. So that's how we will end. You all know I'm highly interactive, and I believe in engagement. Number 1, Ann Haubrick and Chloe Smith, please join me on stage. Have a couple of additional thank yous. It's always good to close with an acknowledgement. I opened with this. We've got some new folks in the room, so once again, wanted to just acknowledge the Centene Foundation for helping to support and fund this amazing experience, and particularly Michael Neidorff, whose vision it was for us to have this. So thank you again to the Centene Corporation. We're gonna find a way to stay connected. You all have been virtual for this entire program, so I'm hoping that today allowed you to solidify the experience. We invite you all to all the things anyway, so just know you'll be connected through RAC. But this particular cohort, we will identify ways in which to keep you all connected. But don't wait on RAC to do that, right? You all can reach out to each other. We'll make sure that you have the contact list. And I just encourage you to take initiative and be in touch with each other. Stand right here, please. Right there in front. It is, that's you too? Oh my gosh. Yeah. Stand, scoot. I really am grateful because I love what I do. And I love who I do it with. You all have experienced RAC's greatest challenge of going from $7 million to $2 million, 16 people to 2. Now we're up to 9, and I just needed for Chloe and Ann to be on this stage because we wouldn't be here without them. Chloe ran grants and programs by herself for a while. Ann came on board, took the reins, so thank you, thank you, thank you. Give them a big hand. Not possible without the team. And I tend to call, I say I have a team of unicorns. And I mean, they're not magical creatures, but so I'm gonna start saying I'm very grateful to work with a team of whole humans, which is truly a blessing. So I like to mark moments like these with pictures. So I have contacted and been in touch with our photographer. So I'm gonna ask, and this is part of the instruction, if you would take your name tag off and put it on your table, because we are gonna recycle name tags and table tents, so you don't have to worry about taking those with you, don't move them. What I'd like to do is get a row of 5 or 6 chairs on the stage, and then we'll get a group of folks standing behind the stage and then standing in front of the stage. But we are going to mark this moment with a group picture. So come on up. For my RAC team members who are also here, thank you. If you just, when you come up, bring a chair with you, would you? Thank you, Brett. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Just put that there and come on. That's perfect. Scooch it that way.